Very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Faro.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case.
Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello and welcome to GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst. And coming up today, the Bank of England about to push up interest rates again. By how much? And what does it mean for your pocket? We'll be analysing why they want to inflict more pain on homeowners and businesses, and how soon could it start bringing inflation down. Latest reaction throughout the programme. Could we be heading towards a deep recession? Home Secretary Suella Braverman visiting the Migrant Processing Centre in Manston, still under fire from even her own Tory MPs on the appalling conditions there, and the fact the government's acknowledged it's operating illegally. Our Home Affairs editor Mark White, who broke the Manston story, is there live for us. This week's People's Poll, 58% of you thinking the British government's lost control of our borders. Only 14% thinking the government is in control, analysing the results in depth. And the breaking news from Pakistan, former Prime Minister Imran Khan has been shot. Latest reports suggest bullets have hit him in the foot, being fired from multiple gunmen in Islamabad. Was it an assassination attempt? We'll have the latest for you coming up here on GB Newsday. Right now, though, the news bulletin with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. And we start with the breaking news. The Bank of England has unveiled the biggest hike in interest rates since the 1980s amid rising inflation. The Monetary Policy Committee has pushed the base rate to 3%, a level not seen since 2008. It's the 8th time in a row that the Bank of England has hiked interest rates. Well, Labour Party Chair Annalise Dodds says Conservatives have lost control of the economy.
This news will obviously cause a huge amount of concern to many households, many businesses as well. Of course, lots of families already had their backs against the wall, and now they're going to be seeing, in many cases, their mortgage costs really going through the roof. And this hasn't come about by accident. It hasn't been an act of God. We have had 12 years of low growth, low productivity, low investment. No plan to set that right from the Conservatives now.
And the UK could be on course for its longest recession since reliable records began a century ago. That's the latest from the Bank of England. And some other breaking news in the last half hour. Shots have been fired near the convoy of former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan, according to multiple local news channels. It's understood he was shot in the foot, but is out of danger. Imran Khan has been leading a protest march to demand snap elections. And back here, Suella Braverman has visited an immigration facility in Dover. The Home Secretary is under increasing pressure over her handling of the migrant crisis. It comes as the government faces potential legal action over conditions at the Manston Processing Centre in Kent. Rishi Sunak has backed Ms Braverman's handling of the issue, saying she's taken significant steps in addressing overcrowding at the facility. A new report examining the emergency response to the Manchester Arena bombing will be published later. It's the second of 3 official reports by Chairman Sir John Saunders and will consider whether some of the victims might have survived had the emergency services responded more quickly. 22 people were killed and hundreds injured in a suicide attack at an Ariana Grande concert in 2017. Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen faces being suspended from the House of Commons for a series of breaches of the rules. The Standards Committee has recommended the MP for North West Leicestershire be suspended for 5 sitting days over what it calls a cavalier attitude to the rules. Mr Bridgen says he's extremely disappointed with his recommended suspension, but accepts the findings. The Kremlin has filed a protest with the UK ambassador to Russia after claiming British specialists were involved in a Ukrainian drone strike on its Black Sea fleet in Crimea. Crowds chanted and held placards calling Britain a terrorist state as the British ambassador was summoned to the Russian Foreign Ministry headquarters. Moscow says Saturday's attack was carried out under the guidance and leadership of the Royal Navy, a claim the UK denies. The Russian Foreign Ministry also says the UK's actions could result in unpredictable and dangerous consequences. Well, President Volodymyr Zelensky claims Russia's fired missiles over a corridor in the Black Sea used by Ukraine to export grain. Only yesterday, President Putin resumed participation in the grain agreement after receiving written guarantees from Ukraine that it wouldn't use the corridor for military purposes. The International Monetary Fund says the deal's instrumental in lessening the impact of the war on global food markets. People in central and northern Japan have been told to shelter after North Korea fired multiple ballistic missiles this morning. The Japanese Defense Ministry says one of the missiles may have been an ICBM, North Korea's longest-ranging projectile that failed over the Sea of Japan. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida called the provocations outrageous. It comes after Pyongyang launched 23 missiles yesterday, demanding the United States and South Korea stop large-scale military exercises. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Mark.
Rhiannon, thanks very much indeed. So, the Bank of England announcing its latest interest rate decision, raising the base rate by 0.75%, 0.75%, as expected. The markets have priced that in, but at 3% now, rates the highest since Black Wednesday over 3 decades ago, driving up borrowing costs, putting the country perhaps at ever more risk of a recession. How's it going to affect us all? And could there be more on the way? Our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, is here with us because, Liam, we are also getting the quarterly forecast, looking at the road ahead. The Bank of England saying the UK could be on course for its longest recession since reliable records began a century ago. It's not looking good.
Yeah, let's be really clear about what's just happened. Rates are now at their highest since 2008. It's the sharpest increase in rates since Black Wednesday 30 years ago. This is expected. The Federal Reserve, the US Central Bank, raised its interest rates by the same amount yesterday, the 4th successive time in a row it's done that. It's the first 75 basis point rise by the Bank of England, though. And this is clearly an attempt to really squeeze inflation out the system. Inflation is 10.1% on the latest numbers for September compared to September 2021. And it will mean that savers get more money when they make their deposits at banks. And a lot of older people live on the interest from their savings, of course. But many people who are younger, particularly young families who might have bought their first home, their mortgage rates will go up. And as an illustration, Mark, if all this rate rise is passed on by the mortgage lenders, which it almost always is, it's in many ways it's not a particularly competitive market, then if you've got a £200,000 mortgage, then that will mean an extra £85 a month on your interest bill to service that mortgage, which is just over £1,000 a year.
Yeah.
These payments made out of your post-tax income, of course, So £1,000 of post-tax income is pretty chunky for somebody on the average wage.
And now an indication there could be yet more to come to try and actually choke off inflation with a recession. And this is obviously puzzling a lot of people. If there's a recession and we haven't got the money going into the economy and swilling around, which pushes up inflation, how effective are these interest rate rises going to be in putting that foot on the brake?
Well, interest rates are a very, very, very blunt instrument, and they need to be wielded early and with attitude. And the problem is that the Bank of England hasn't moved nearly quickly enough. It should have been doing this months and months ago, as some of us were writing at the time. Then interest rates could have risen by less to squeeze out inflation, because inflation wouldn't have become as embedded. There is some good news here, though. Over recent days, government borrowing costs have been falling sharply. It's partly because we've got a new Prime Minister and Chancellor who seem to be a bit more willing to mollify financial markets and put forward the idea of raising taxes and slowing down the rate of increase in spending. So those government borrowing costs are coming down, and it doesn't seem that inflation expectations are coming down as well. So interest rates, some people thought they were going to peak at 6.5% just a few weeks ago. It's now looking like more of a 4.5% to 5%.
Right, and Ben Broadbent, the Deputy Governor of the bank, picked that figure 5%. But when do we think that would happen? Because clearly if people are trying to juggle their household finances and work out what to do about their mortgages, if they know there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel next spring, then they can work accordingly. But at the moment, it's a really gloomy picture for them.
It is pretty gloomy, and the Bank of England, of course, as you said, is saying that it does think the economy is already in recession. We were saying that earlier this week here on GB News, looking at some of the survey data, particularly the manufacturing sector. Look, there are around 11 million mortgages outstanding in the UK. 8.5 million of them are on fixed rates. But the thing is, when you're on a fixed rate for 2 years or 5 years, that time can expire, and many people are coming to the end of a 2-year fix. The good news is that the rate at which they renew their fix will be higher than it currently is, but it won't be as high as we thought it would be just a few weeks ago, because those government borrowing costs have calmed down, and the Bank of England will probably not raise interest rates as much as we thought we would. But I'd say the peak in interest rates, as far as the Bank of England is concerned, will probably be sometime in the middle of next year.
Right, so we've got more to come. What about the mortgage market then? I know John Charcoal, one of the big mortgage brokers, is saying, the potential lower rates are not potentially being passed on, because obviously they're sitting quite understandably on their hands waiting to see how these things go, because clearly people have got to make decisions now if they're coming to the end of those fixed rates and trying to work out what do we do for the next 5 years even.
Well, the only thing that keeps big financial companies honest really is competition, and there's a lot less competition in the mortgage market than there has been in recent years, unfortunately. It's a bit like when oil prices go up, Mark, the petrol retailers instantly put the price of petrol and diesel up, but it goes up like a rocket. But when oil prices come down, they come down like a feather. And I think it's similar in the market for finance. These are big companies. There's not enough competition. So I do think it will take the mortgage companies some time to react to these lower interest rate expectations. But for now, it's clear that interest rates are going up, and we can only keep our fingers crossed that does finally squeeze inflation out of the system.
And that's not, it's affecting business as well, because they have to borrow massively.
Absolutely.
Liam, for the moment, thank you. More reaction, of course, as we get it, but let's reflect on how people are coping or not, of course, with more on the current economic climate and the impact on everything from charity donations to property prices. Theo Chikomba has this report for us.
Meeting the needs of cancer patients in hospital, the Lewis Foundation in Northamptonshire delivers gift bags to patients in oncology wards. For charities like this one, cash is king. What impact will an interest rate rise mean for them?
Because what we're finding is donations have significantly decreased, especially since the interest rates keep rising. And I'll say over the last, 3 to 4 months, we've noticed a drop of about 90% in our donations. And for us as a charity that are providing these gift packs and our service for free to patients, that has a financial impact on us. Our concern is long-term. If this doesn't get sorted out, then people like us cannot provide the service to the patients, and they really need our support.
It's not just charities, homeowners and potential buyers are facing increasing costs too. Interest rates are reflected by the mortgage rate offered by lenders, which makes mortgages more expensive for borrowers. So, should people be worried?
With obviously interest rates going up and more importantly the level of stress testing going up, and by stress testing I mean the rate at which the lenders will assess the affordability, shall we say, of prospective buyers, that naturally of course that's going to lead to a price correction, not necessarily a crash but a price correction. So I'd say my message to homeowners in today's market is that they just need to be a little bit more open and realistic to the true value of their property moving forward, because of course if the affordability isn't there for the buyer then the transactions aren't going to be able to happen.
Meanwhile, back at the Lewis Foundation, demand is increasing. They're now delivering to 16 hospitals, including Northampton General.
And we've found that there is a real need for adult cancer patients as they go through treatment. A lot of people can't afford to buy the basic things that keeps them going, like a book to pass the time or their toiletries that they need whilst they're in hospital. But they also want the company and someone to spend time talking with them too. And it's not something that the NHS can provide. So we provide this additional service, and what we've found is that people really need it, and that has led to our charity growing as much as it has over the last 6 years.
At a time when household and business finances are under pressure, a higher rate will make it more expensive to borrow and encourage people to save, as the Bank of England attempts to curb high inflation. Theo Chkomba, GB News.
Reaction already coming in. Our political reporter Olivia Utley joining us in the studio. Olivia, Sir Keir Starmer, Labour leader, basically indicating that this is going to make things much, much harder, saying mortgage payers now paying a Tory premium.
Yes, and I'm sure we're going to hear that line a lot over the next few weeks. Of course, the government can argue quite fairly that this is happening all over the world. We saw just last night that US rates went up to 4%. The problem is that it is hitting people at a time when they're just experiencing cost of living crisis absolutely everywhere. And against this backdrop, it's going to be even harder for Rishi Sunak and Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to bring in some of those tax rises and public sector cuts that we've been talking about. This is expected to add about £84 per month to the average mortgage.
Which is only 200,000.
Which is
I say only. A
200,000.
lot of people have got a much higher mortgage than that.
Absolutely. And actually, talking about that, we've been warned that those in London and the South East are going to face the brunt of this because they're leveraged up the most, their houses cost the most, and they're going to see the biggest fall in house prices now. The Bank of England is saying that we might already be in recession, although they quantify that by saying it's quite a shallow recession so far, but it's expected to last around 2 years. And normally when we'd be going into a recession, we'd expect interest rates to be falling, but instead they're rising. And that does make life very difficult for the Prime Minister and the Chancellor.
Well, Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves now just broken cover, telling Rishi Sunak to face up to his mistakes that have led to a vicious cycle of stagnation. Families now facing higher mortgages and more anxiety after months of economic chaos, she said. And clearly we had the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, saying they were flying blind going into this decision ahead of this November 17th fiscal statement or budget, autumn budget now. There is a decision now for Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt about how much more pain they can inflict in terms of tax rises and cuts in public services if we are going to be heading for a 2-year recession. This is an existential question for them now.
It is, and I suppose the only mitigating factor is, although it's bad news for them that interest rates have gone up because it means that any pain they inflict will be felt even harder by ordinary working families, the bright side, I suppose, is that this will hopefully start to bring inflation down quite sharply, which in some ways will lessen the cost of living crisis.
And looking at the political fallout, clearly the problem for Rishi Sunak, even though you can point to the mini-budget and Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss making that Horlicks of it, they have got a problem in that Rishi Sunak was previously the Chancellor, and certainly Labour and Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer will be hitting that point home all the time.
Absolutely, and yes, there's a bit of clear water between the Rishi Sunak Prime Minister and Rishi Sunak Chancellor, but it's only 6 weeks. The other thing as well is that Liz Truss had a bad relationship with the Bank of England. Kwasi Kwarteng didn't warn properly about the budgets, didn't use all the OBR forecasting, etc. Rishi Sunak won't want to make that mistake. There are Conservative MPs grumbling at the moment who feel that the Bank of England should have seen what was coming quicker. All last year, they were saying that inflation was going to be transitory and felt that they didn't need to respond by hiking up interest rates, which means now they're making up for lost time and raising interest rates by a lot. Rishi Sunak might feel that he should be throwing the blame back onto the Bank of England, but of course that would make life very, very difficult for him, because the last thing he wants is a bad relationship with his governor.
Indeed. And of course, we saw a little bit of that between Andrew Bailey and Kwasi Kwarteng at the time. But the other thing that sort of was starting to emerge yesterday is how much Downing Street is indicating they'll be rowing back on all those promises made during the leadership election, and particularly perhaps on spending defence even, a key Tory platform.
Yeah, and Rishi Sunak was made plain that the reason, or a spokesperson made plain that the reason is because the economic outlook has changed so much from what happened over the summer. But I think it's also interesting politically because it fits into what we're seeing of what the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak administration is going to look like. We've had previous Prime Ministers come out on their very first day and explain how they want to, reweave the fabric of Britain, and we saw...
Sunlit uplands was another phrase we remember from Boris Johnson.
Exactly, and Theresa May talking about changing life for the just about managings. We haven't really seen any of that from Sunak. We've seen a real rowing back. Already politics feels as though it's sort of boring again. He's going to be, one of his ministers said today to Tom Harwood that he was going to be sober and competent and methodical. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing. He's not going to rush into anything, even the leadership promises that he made over the summer. He's going to keep looking at the evidence and keep working out just how far he can push it.
Merry Christmas. Olivia, thank you very much indeed. And of course, we'll bring you more reaction as it comes through on that. To remind you, 0.75%, 0.75% increase on the base rate, now up to 3%. To other political news, Home Secretary Suella Braverman coming under ever-increasing pressure to get a grip on the migrant crisis and is now set to visit Dover today amid international condemnation over her claims that the UK was facing an invasion of migrants, and she will be inspecting the now acknowledged illegal conditions at the Manston Immigration Processing Centre in Kent. Around 3,500 people at the moment being detained there for weeks at a site intended to hold just 1,600. It's also emerged that some of the migrants taken out of the centre on a bus being abandoned at Victoria Station in London due to a massive Home Office error, the claim from a charity worker involved. Then yesterday, during Prime Minister's questions, Rishi Sunak coming under fire from Labour over the Conservative Party's record on migration, asylum claims, Rwanda policy and the Migrant Processing Centre. It's a big list. Let's speak now to our GB News Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who is down at Manston for us. Of course, you broke the story about Manston, Mark. What is she likely to be being shown and being told when she gets there? Mark, we seem to have a problem with the sound there. Let's see if we can re-establish the link. Clearly, the weather's not that great down at Manston, down there in Thanet in Kent. Just to remind you, the latest we were getting an estimate of 3,500 people being housed there. And for some weeks, in some cases, where it was designed to hold 1,600, just literally overnight, they were supposed to be there before being processed. And this report then, with the coaches yesterday arriving to take some away, that on Tuesday night, many had arrived in Victoria and were actually just left literally on the street in their flip-flops. I think we can now speak to Mark. Mark, we've established comms with you, communications. Can you hear us?
Yeah, it's the old batteries, isn't it? Even in 2022, the batteries still go flat. There you go.
Anyway, your batteries are clearly working okay.
Is that, yes, indeed. We're talking over each other now. Apologies for that. The situation down here, Mark, is that Suella Braverman has been at that Dover processing centre, the scene of that firebomb attack on Sunday, a sister processing facility to this one, the controversial one here at Manston, which has, we're told, about 3,500 Channel migrants still in that processing centre. Of course, they're only ever supposed to be here, Mark, for some 24 hours at most while they're effectively get their fingerprints taken, other biometric details. They're briefly interviewed and then they're put on buses out to interim accommodation, usually in hotels, before entering the public sector in terms of council housing and the like. But because of the sheer numbers who've been crossing the channel in recent weeks, it's stacked up here. And with the resources they have, they've just been unable to cope. Allegations, of course, that the Home Secretary had halted or at least slowed down the requisition of these hotel rooms to put these Channel migrants, now asylum seekers, of course, into. She denied that in the House of Commons when she was giving an emergency statement on this issue. She said that since she has been Home Secretary, some 30 additional hotels have been requisitioned by the Home Office to house these people. So she's here to have a look for herself, her first visit to Manston and of course the Dover Processing Centre. Where she is at the moment, Mark, is at the Coast Guard headquarters. She spent about 40 minutes or so at the processing centre, gone to Coast Guard HQ and then will make her way here to Manston.
What happens to all those people behind you in that centre? We saw some of those buses arriving and taking people away. We've now got this report from a charity worker saying that people were literally dumped on the street at Victoria in flip-flops. They had to go to Primark to buy them clothes to keep them warm, and they were eventually then taken in another bus up to Norwich. I mean, it still seems chaotic.
Chaotic, I think, would be the way to describe it. These charities were saying they were deliberately dumped there. I can't imagine for the life of me that the Home Office would ever deliberately do that in a sense. It was clearly a breakdown of some system and they were left there for some considerable time. It is clearly unacceptable, but the Home Office haven't really spoken on this as yet. It's one of the questions that we've been asking them with regard to what happened to these individuals and why they were left at Victoria Station in this condition for hours before they were eventually sorted out and then shipped off, we're told, to a hotel in Norwich. As I say, one of the questions we're asking the Home Office. We're also trying to get to the bottom of this supposed judicial review that we're told might be heard as well into the processing centre here at Manston, and whether or not it is legal. And of course the indication is it's not legal, because someone being processed like this and then bailed, they're not supposed to be in a processing centre like this for any more than 24 hours under the law.
OK, Mark, your batteries lasted the course, we're glad to say. Thanks very much indeed with
Just about.
the weather. Indeed, yeah. You can't blame it in those weather conditions. Let's just bring you up to date on this breaking news we're getting from Pakistan about the attack on the former Prime Minister Imran Khan. The latest we're getting from his political party, the PTI, saying another 4 people were hurt in the attack in Islamabad, but no one has been killed. Still not clear whether Imran Khan was hit in the foot or leg, but an aide being quoted saying he's not in danger. Imran Khan, who's 70, being taken to hospital for treatment. One report suggesting a male suspect has been arrested, although there were some reports earlier that there were multiple gunmen, and clearly it's a changing position which we'll update you on as we get more. Now, here, a new report into the emergency service response to the Manchester Arena bombing is set to be published. We'll be discussing some of the lessons that have to be learnt. Recommendations likely to follow, of course. Let's take a quick short break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm
Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back to GB Newsday. Now, more than 2 years since the public inquiry into the Manchester Arena attack, the second volume of its report is expected to be published later today. The long-awaited findings into the emergency response will be laid out in full, with a total of 291 witnesses and experts giving evidence. The inquiry chairman, Sir John Saunders, is expected to give a statement at 2:30 when he will assess the adequacy of the emergency response and the circumstances of the deaths of each of those who lost their lives in the tragedy. Well, we're joined now by a senior research fellow at Leeds Beckett University's Law School, researching terrorism, security and policing, David Lowe. David, thank you for joining us. Clearly, we are awaiting the details, but we do know there's already been an established, what they call a catastrophic litany of failures. But one of those perhaps is a deliberate part of policy where the ambulance teams in particular, the paramedics, were prevented from going in because they thought there might have been a secondary device there.
Yeah, there was obviously initial confusion to the reports that came in. I mean, policing-wise, it's the British Transport Police that look after Manchester Arena, not the Greater Manchester Police, but obviously with the event that happened, Greater Manchester Police took over control of the operation. Well, what they then called was what they called
David,
Operation
I'm sorry
Flames.
to interrupt you. If you can hold on, we've just got some breaking news coming through from the Bank of England. We'll be back to you shortly, but we're just going to leave you there until we get some guidance from the Bank of England on the decision on interest rate increase.
During that period. These are big changes. They have a real impact on people's lives. So why are we doing it? And why are we doing it now when so many people are already struggling with higher energy and food prices and other bills? Well, quite simply, we're increasing bank rate because inflation is too high. And it's the bank's job to bring it down. For a long time, inflation had been low and stable. Most people did not have to worry about inflation, but that has changed. It's changed with supply chain problems after the pandemic, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the shrinkage of the UK labour force. Consumer price inflation now stands at over 10%. But I know for many people it will feel worse because the prices of essentials like energy and groceries have risen by much more. People should not have to worry about inflation as they go about their daily business. That's why we've been raising interest rates and did so again today. Low and stable inflation is the bedrock of a stable economy, a predictable economy in which people can go about their lives and plan for their futures with confidence. An economy in which hard-earned money keeps its value. If we do not act forcefully now, it will be worse later on. And as the forecast we are publishing today shows, it is a tough road ahead. The sharp increase in energy prices caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine has made us poorer as a nation. The level of economic activity is likely to be flat and even fall for some time. But the economy will recover and inflation will fall. We cannot, I'm afraid, pretend to know what will happen to gas prices. That depends on the war in Ukraine. But from where we stand now, we think inflation will begin to fall back from the middle of next year, probably quite sharply. Now, to make sure that happens, bank rate may have to go up further over the coming months. We can't make promises about future interest rates, but based on where we stand today, we think bank rate will have to go up by less than currently priced in financial markets. And that's important because, for instance, it means that the rates on new fixed-term mortgages should not need to rise as they have done. I want to make some additional points, and there will be some slides coming up, I believe. There we are. To start with, there has been significant volatility in UK financial markets since our last monetary policy report, and indeed our last press conference back at the beginning of August. So the lines in this chart show you the peak level of interest rates expected in financial markets in various economies and how those expectations have moved around since our last forecast. The expectations for bank rate here in the UK are plotted on the turquoise line. At the time of the August report, the market implied path for bank rate rose to a peak of about 3% in March next year. By the MPC's September policy announcement, which was on the 22nd of September, the peak was 5%, 1 year ahead. On the 27th of September, 5 days later, when turmoil in the market was most intense, the path reached its highest peak at nearly 6.5% in November next year. At the market close yesterday, it stood at about 4.75%, and it's currently lower than that now. Given these moves, we have conditioned our November forecast on an average of the market-implied paths over the final 7 days of our usual 15-day window. This means that the forecast we present today is conditioned on a path for bank rate that rises to a peak of 5.25% during the second quarter of next year. Now, despite the shorter window, this is substantially higher than we had in August. Part of this repricing in UK interest rates reflects global developments. But as this next chart illustrates, there's clearly been a UK-specific component, and you can see that in the light turquoise bars. Indeed, these significant moves in UK yields and in UK financial conditions more broadly have occurred in parallel with significant developments in fiscal policy. As we describe in a box in the Monetary Policy Report, the government has announced an energy price guarantee and an energy bill relief scheme. These schemes provide support to households and businesses with their energy bills. Now, the full energy price guarantee will now last for 6 months. Details are yet to follow on the level of support provided beyond that period. The MPC has therefore adopted a stylised indicative path for household energy prices in producing the forecast. The working assumption is that the typical household energy bill is halfway between the announced £2,500 limit under the EPG and the level implied by futures prices under the Ofgem price cap. The energy support policies are likely to limit significantly further increases in inflation and reduce its volatility, while also supporting spending relative to the August projections. Other fiscal measures announced as of the 17th of October also support demand relative to the August projection. But the November forecast does not incorporate any fiscal measures that may be announced at the autumn statement scheduled for the 17th of November. Turning to gas prices, sadly, as a consequence of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I've had to talk at length about wholesale gas prices. I think this is the third press conference we've had to do this. Wholesale gas prices continue to be exceptionally volatile. Spot prices have fallen recently, as you can see from the turquoise line in this chart, but medium-term futures prices have been driven higher by Russia's restriction of gas supplies to Europe and concerns about storage over the winter and beyond. Now, you can see that by comparing the orange line for November with the purple line for August. The committee has conditioned its November forecast on the full futures curve for wholesale energy and non-energy commodity prices. And this is a change to the previous convention that wholesale energy prices follow their respective curves for the first 6 months of the projection only, and then remain constant. To be frank, I would describe this as a pragmatic choice we had to make. The new conditioning assumption avoids what would otherwise be a purely mechanical jump in the projection for consumer prices, which would be a product of using the former convention beyond the assumed 2-year duration of the government's support to retail energy prices. Let me move on to the economic outlook. By comparison with moves in financial markets, the news in the economic data since August has been more modest. Gross domestic product has been weaker than we expected. Labour market data have been stronger, and inflation numbers, while high, have come in about as we expected in August. We keep a close eye on the labour market. There are some signs that labour demand is starting to soften, but the labour market remains tight. The unemployment rate fell to 3.5% in the 3 months to August, which is the lowest level since 1974. And as you can see in this next chart, in the purple bars, the number of unemployed people has now fallen below its pre-COVID level. But a key reason why the labour market has tightened since the pandemic is a marked increase in the number of people who are without a job and who are not actively seeking one. The number of such so-called inactive people has risen again since the August report, as you can see in the blue bars, and by more than projected. And sadly, many of the people who are outside the labour market report that they suffer from long-term sickness. I'll say a little bit about the forecast looking further forwards. The MPC expects domestic inflationary pressures to remain strong over the next year, but in its central projection, which is conditioned on the market-implied path for bank rate that rises to 5.25%, inflation then falls sharply. It reaches 1.4% at the end of the second year, below the 2% target, and it falls to 0 at the end of the third year. Contributing to this fall is the purely arithmetic fact that the previous rises in energy prices drop out of the calculations of the annual inflation rate. But in addition, tighter financial conditions and a squeeze on real incomes slow demand and eventually lead to excess supply and rising unemployment. This downturn in the economy dampens domestic inflationary pressures. In the committee's best collective judgment, GDP will continue to fall throughout next year and into 2024. Compared with previous UK recessions, GDP remains weak relative to its pre-recession level for a prolonged period. You can see that in the yellow line in this chart. There is, I think, however, more to this story. The committee will not pursue a path that we think will drive inflation far below target. The MPC does not follow the market. It sets the level of bank rate to return inflation to the 2% target sustainably, and in a way that avoids undesirable volatility in output. In every monetary policy report, we also publish a projection conditional on a constant level of bank rate, though for the avoidance of any doubt, with the clear warning that it does not mean the committee expects to keep bank rate constant either. But that said, comparing outcomes under this alternative conditioning assumption with outcomes in the central projection gives a sense of how different policy decisions may shape the paths for economic activity and inflation. And you can see that with this chart now, with the dashed yellow line that's been added, which is conditioned on a constant level of bank rate at 3%. And you can see that the depth of the recession is much shallower. Not surprisingly, the projected outcomes for inflation are also different. Conditional on a constant rate, consumer price inflation is projected to be a little above, rather than below, the target at the end of the second year. And let me add a further point before I conclude. Regardless of the path for bank rate, the MPC judges that the risk to its inflation projections are skewed to the upside. In part, the skew reflects the possibility of more persistence in wage and price setting. The upside skew has important implications for monetary policy. Just to put it simply, yes, we project a steep fall in inflation, but there are substantial upside risks to that path. And it's not least for this reason that the majority of the committee judges that further increases in bank rates may be required to return inflation sustainably to target, should the economy evolve broadly in line with the forecast presented in the November Monetary Policy Report. However, the central projections, conditional on the market-implied path of bank rate, serve as a reminder that we should not increase bank rate too far. The MPC judges that the path for bank rate required to return inflation sustainably to target is shallower than that priced into financial markets. There are, however, considerable uncertainties around the outlook. If the outlook suggests more persistent inflation pressures, the committee will respond forcefully as necessary. And with that, Ben, Dave and I will be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. We'll move to questions. Usual process. Grateful if you could wait for the microphones to get to you and state your name and organisation clearly when you start. I'll get through as many
Governor
as I
of the
can.
Bank of England, Andrew Bailey. But let's ask our expert, Liam Halligan, the questions to try and make sense of all that for you if you've been watching and listening. Is it good or bad news? Liam, the good news is they expect inflation to peak at 5.25%, second quarter of next year, i.e. middle of next year. However, we may be paying a price with a recession that could last maybe 2 years.
Yeah, it is a very mixed bag. Quite frank language used by Andrew Bailey there, the Governor of the Bank of England, talking of a tough road ahead, but also defending the decision to raise interest rates, saying low inflation is the bedrock of a prosperous society, so that the hard-earned money keeps its value. That's really in stark terms. The Bank of England expects inflationary pressures to remain strong over the next year, with inflation and interest rates peaking in the middle of 2023, as you said. Here's a direct quote: inflation will begin to fall back by the middle of next year, but rates may have to go up further before that. I think what he's saying is that he thinks financial markets have priced in more interest rate rises than the bank now seems will be necessary. So what he's saying is that mortgage rates, fixes for 2 and 5 years, should not really go up all that much because the Bank of England has just raised its base rate, if you like. He's kind of, I wouldn't say pleading, but he's trying to signal to the providers of finance, for people who take out personal loans and mortgages, that they mustn't over-egg these interest rate rises.
Or panic and go in and try and get a deal at the moment. I mean, the direct quote: rates for fixed-term mortgages should not need to rise as they have done. He's sort of wagging the finger a little bit, maybe at the
a little bit. I mean, there's no suggestion here of illegality or wrongdoing.
They're covering their bases, obviously.
What he's saying to the big mortgage companies who are looking at, they borrow money off bigger investors, they then lend it to us, and they take their profit. What he's saying is that he thinks the financial markets are now overestimating how high interest rates will have to go. Before, in the aftermath of the mini-budget, financial markets were estimating interest rates could peak at 6.5% or 7% even, which is where they are in the US. It now seems that the Bank of England thinks they're going to peak about 5.5%, but financial markets are still thinking 6 or 6%. So maybe those expectations may now come down, which crucially, Mark, means if you are going to fix for 2 or 5 years, here's some good news: you may get a better deal.
And obviously, as you said, competition in the market brings that about. However, I did actually note one word that we haven't heard for quite a while: unemployment. And obviously, he's indicating that the price for the slowdown in the economy will be a squeeze on prices, which is good. That brings inflation down. Energy prices will drop out of the system, but it could all really come with GDP either falling or going flat or falling, and therefore the economy slowing down so much that unemployment starts to climb up.
Unemployment's been at record lows for a long time, but some of us have been saying for quite a few years now that in some ways the figures are disguising the fact that lots of people are actually dropping out of the workforce and they're no longer seeking work, so they're not classified as unemployed, they're classified as economically inactive.
Whatever that is.
Which means that they don't feature in the headline inconvenient unemployment numbers. Now, that trend towards economic inactivity, so voluntary unemployment, if you like, really escalated during the pandemic, And millions of workers haven't rejoined the workforce after that pandemic. That's one reason that we've got such a shortage of workers in this country. It's not that we're short of people, it's because people aren't going back to work. So I think you are right to highlight that. And as the economy slows, we spoke earlier this week, didn't we, Mark, about manufacturing being at its lowest ebb since since lockdown. As that happens, as firms invest less, as corporation tax goes up, frankly, which it's about to do in the autumn statement on November the 17th, then, of course, fewer workers will be taken on. Firms will be less, as you say, bullish, less optimistic about the future. So I don't think we're anywhere near the kind of really endemic unemployment that we remember as young people in the 70s and 80s. But I do think unemployment is going to start to become more of an issue in the months ahead as inflation peaks towards the middle of next year.
A price that we pay. Liam, as ever, thank you. More analysis, of course, to come as we get the bank indicating what the full picture is. For the moment, thanks very much indeed. But let's return now to our story about the Manchester Arena bombing report. We were speaking to our guest, David Lowe, who is from the Leeds Beckett University Law School, researching terrorism, security and policing. David, thanks for hanging on. Apologies for breaking away there to hear about the snapshot of the economy. What about the snapshot now of this inquiry into the Manchester, the bombing and, of course, the emergency response? Because we were discussing before we broke away how one of the problems identified at the inquiry was that the ambulance workers wouldn't go in for fear there might be a second device there.
Yeah, and the other thing was the Bronze Commander, the senior police officer at the scene, also commenced Operation Plato, which is to deal with a marauding terrorist attack. And that was based from information that was coming in. Now, at that particular time, paramedics were held back until the marauding terrorist attack had been eliminated and the place made safe. But of course, we now know that was not the case. And also, we now know there's no secondary IED. So no doubt Sir John Saunders will actually make reference to this issue because we're down to communication again. But I will add, Mark, that events have changed. Well, this is 5.5 years ago now, the Manchester Arena attack. There's been a change in the role for paramedics at a terrorist incident. One, they have more protective equipment and they are now encouraged to go in. And I think this is one of the key things, of course, of why there's been more fatalities and at the attack, that there could have been less if more paramedics had been allowed to go in. So it's a really important development that's happened post the Manchester Arena attack.
Yeah, I mean, the dreadful stories, of course. One in particular, John Atkinson, of course, the attempts to save him with a tourniquet on the leg where he didn't then get help from paramedics in time. But was it done for what might be called the right reasons, that the protocols were in place with the various sort of exercises that they do on these disasters, that perhaps the paramedics hadn't gone in for the right reasons, if you can put it that way?
Yeah, if we put ourselves back to May 2017, at that particular time, the last thing that you would want is your paramedics to go in who haven't got right equipment. And, of course, they become casualties themselves.
Yeah.
So that was the thing at the time, but it's changed, Mark. It has that approach has changed.
What about the families, then? They're campaigning long and hard to get their stories heard. And, of course, our heart goes out to the families who have been affected, particularly with the youngsters. Are we in a position where we can say that justice has been done for them?
Yeah, the Saunders inquiry has been absolutely, it's gone through everything in great detail. I mean, as you said, this is the second of 3 reports coming out, and we only have to look at the first report. So, yeah, in that sense, the sad part with any attack like this, where we have the casualties, we just can't bring the brief back. We can't bring the dead back. But it's having that notification that, yes, there were issues over communication between the 3 emergency services, because people might remember it was 2.5 hours before the fire service actually got to the scene. Changes and developments, and that's a positive to take away is, having that arrangement where an attack actually happens, where circumstances and how the operation is improving, so we can look to the future and hopefully minimise the impact that we saw at Manchester.
David, thank you very much indeed for staying with us and, of course, bringing us your reaction. And indeed, we'll have the latest from Manchester a little later here on GB Newsday. Thank you very much indeed. Now, let's update you on this breaking news that we were getting from Pakistan, with the reports that shots were fired at the convoy of former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, according to an official of his party. The latest reports we're getting from his PTI party saying that this was near the capital, Islamabad, Wazirabad, and that he was hit in either the foot or the leg, but an aide being quoted saying he was not in danger, but aides saying it was an attempt to assassinate him. One male suspect being arrested, according to Pakistan's GOTV. These are pictures we're getting, and clearly he's being taken away for hospital treatment and was able to help himself into the car, but suggestions that he's been shot in either the foot or the leg. Reports suggesting multiple shots were fired, but one gunman arrested, according to Pakistan sources, GOTV. It had been a protest march, we're being told, to demand snap elections. More on that, of course, as it comes through. Now, let's reflect on our latest People's Poll here on GB News. And we are, as the migrant crisis continues, looking at the results with, in detail, 58% of you thinking that the British government has lost control of our borders. Only 14%, right at the end there, on the end of the screen, thinking that the government is in control. While on the issue of Albanian migrants, 61% of you thinking they should be asked to return to Albania. And in the latest voting intentions, well, Labour's lead has been cut, although it's still 26%, or 26 points rather, but it's come down from 31-point lead, a fall of 4 points on last week, a Conservative recovery of some sorts. Labour then 47%, Conservatives 21%, Lib Dems 10%. Well, joining us in the studio now, our polling analyst, David Cowling. David, you've been hard at work and you've got more numbers there for us. And clearly with a changing story day to day, people are reacting to the news they're seeing, particularly, of course, on the Albanian aspect of this.
Yes, and also, of course, for those who think that immigration isn't really an issue, I mean, we have the census figures published which show that 1 in 6 people in England and Wales who live in England and Wales weren't born here.
Yeah.
So that's the scale, if you like, of the size of immigration, so to speak, and one of the reasons why it's so prominent. But I think my take on this is that, especially with the Albanian question, the people will make a distinction between asylum, genuine asylum, or economic migrants.
Or even those being trafficked for criminal reasons, of course,
Absolutely.
Which is another aspect Mark White, our security editor, has touched on.
Absolutely so. And whether by allowing people across, one is simply supporting the gangs who are processing them. So I think the nation shows that it will support genuine asylum seekers, but I think there's rising concerns about how many people who are coming across are not in that category, but are here either by being trafficked or because they're seeking to improve their condition.
And to add a little bit of spice to it, the Prime Minister of Albania, Edi Rama, accusing Britain of becoming a madhouse and trying to find scapegoats where failed policies were to blame. And of course, this is the key. There is a political fallout on this. And we remember Keir Starmer saying, get a grip. That being shared perhaps by the public as well in terms of the government's handling on this?
Well, certainly signs of people coming across the channel, which we've been seeing for a very long time, has contributed to the reaction, that the borders are porous, that every state has the right to guarantee its own borders. And if that starts to break down in any degree, then understandably there's a public reaction. And certainly that seems to have come through to the public consciousness. But they're deeply sceptical about our political class generally as to whom is going to sort it.
No matter who's in charge, yeah. But on that bigger picture, indications with a new Prime Minister and a new Chancellor that Labour has lost a little bit of ground, or is it the Tories making ground back up on them?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, I looked at our poll of 3 weeks ago, compared with the latest today that you've reported, and basically the Conservatives up 7, Labour down 6.
Yeah.
So what I think has happened is that in the opinion poll, the voting intention polls, is that the Conservatives have begun to restore themselves to something like equilibrium and the rest of it. But still, Labour, although coming down, is still in a very
way ahead. Yeah.
in a dominant position that reminds us of the run-up to 1997. Now, that doesn't mean to say that's what's going to happen in 2 years' time if the election is then, but we're still in that territory. So some improvement without question for the Conservatives, but my God, what a hole they've got to get
And we'll see what the trend is, of course, if it's 2 years away or perhaps sooner, who knows. Yes. Thank you very much for taking us through the numbers. Great to see you again. You're watching GB Newsday. Plenty more to come to on that base rate hike. Yes, up 0.75%. What does it actually mean for you? We'll be analysing it in more detail. But let's take a quick break for you now.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Welcome back. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Bank of England has warned the UK is facing a tough road ahead as it increased the interest rate. The base rate is being raised by 0.75 percentage points to 3%. That's the single biggest increase in more than 3 decades. The Chancellor says the government's priority is to restore stability, sort out public finances and get debt falling. And he admitted there are no easy options. The Bank of England says the country is on course for its longest recession since the 1920s, with the Governor, Andrew Bailey, saying they had to act.
People should not have to worry about inflation as they go about their daily business. That's why we've been raising interest rates and did so again today. Low and stable inflation is the bedrock of a stable economy, a predictable economy in which people can go about their lives and plan for their futures with confidence. An economy in which hard-earned money keeps its value. If we do not act forcefully now, it will be worse later on. And as the forecast we are publishing today shows, it is a tough road ahead.
Well, Labour Party Chair Annalise Dodd says Conservatives have lost control of the economy.
This news will obviously cause a huge amount of concern to many households, many businesses as well. Of course, lots of families already had their backs against the wall, and now they're going to be seeing, in many cases, their mortgage costs really going through the roof. And this hasn't come about by accident. It hasn't been an act of God. We have had 12 years of low growth, low productivity, low investment, no plan to set that right from the Conservatives now.
Shots have been fired near the convoy of Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan. According to an aide, he was shot in the shin but is out of danger. Imran Khan had been leading a protest march on the capital Islamabad to demand snap elections. Home Secretary Suella Braverman will visit the Manston Processing Centre this afternoon as she comes under increasing pressure over her handling of the migrant crisis. It follows this morning's visit to the Dover immigration facility. That as the government faces potential legal action over conditions at the Manston immigration facility in Kent. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has backed Ms Braverman's handling of the issue, saying she's taken significant steps in addressing overcrowding there. A new report examining the emergency response to the Manchester Arena bombing will be published this afternoon. It's the second of 3 official reports by Chairman Sir John Saunders, and it will consider whether some of the victims might have survived had the emergency services responded more quickly. 22 people were killed and hundreds injured in a suicide attack at an Ariana Grande concert in 2017. Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen faces being suspended from the House of Commons for a series of breaches of the rules. The Standards Committee has recommended the MP for North West Leicestershire be suspended for 5 sitting days over what it calls a cavalier attitude to the rules. Mr Bridgen says he's extremely disappointed with his recommended suspension, but accepts the findings. The Kremlin has filed a protest with the UK ambassador to Russia after claiming British specialists were involved in a Ukrainian drone strike on its Black Sea fleet in Crimea. Crowds chanted and held placards calling Britain a terrorist state as the British ambassador was summoned to the Russian Foreign Ministry headquarters. Moscow says Saturday's attack was carried out under the guidance and leadership of the Royal Navy, a claim the UK denies. The Russian Foreign Ministry says the UK's actions could result in unpredictable and dangerous consequences. The Japanese Coast Guard says North Korea may have fired yet another missile in the last half hour. It follows reports of multiple ballistic missiles fired this morning, triggering a warning Japan's northern regions where people were told to stay indoors. The Japanese Defense Ministry says one of them was an intercontinental ballistic missile that failed mid-flight. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has described it as outrageous. North Korea's multiple launches come as the US and South Korea stage large-scale military exercises. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Mark.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed, and welcome back to GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst. And we've got all the reaction to that interest rate hike up to 3%, a 0.75% rise from the Bank of England this past hour, the largest increase, or the sharpest increase, we should say, since 1989. Also, the under-fire Home Secretary Suella Braverman visiting Dover and Manston amid growing criticism of the immigration system and conditions at the processing facilities. And we'll have the latest on the trial of nurse Lucy Letby denying the murders of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 others. We'll have the latest live from the court. So, the Bank of England raising the base rate by 0.75%, as expected, but now at 3%. We've seen the sharpest increase since Black Wednesday over 3 decades ago and driving up borrowing costs to where they were back in 2008. The bank also warning that we're in for perhaps the longest recession in a century. Deep joy. Well, to work out what it means for us all, we're joined by our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, and also Jasmine Birtles, founder of Money Magpie. Thank you very much indeed to join our doom and gloom panel. First of all, the good news, 0.75% as expected, which the markets had worked in, and indications from the Bank of England Governor himself, Andrew Bailey, that the mortgage situation may not be quite as chaotic and bad as we had feared it could be.
So in talking about the tough road ahead, as Rhiannon just said, Andrew Bailey also signalled that in his view and the view of the Monetary Policy Committee, who voted 7-2 for this interest rate increase, so pretty emphatic, in their view, the market has been over-egging the extent to which interest rates are going to rise. After that mini-budget, when the pound was falling and government borrowing costs were spiralling upward, financial markets were betting that Bank of England's interest rate would peak at above 6%.
Yeah.
Now, before today's decision, they were thinking more like just below 6%. What the governor's now saying is he thinks interest rates will peak, the Bank of England's interest rate, by 5.5% in the middle of next year, with inflation peaking around that time. That's good news. So if you're looking to fix your mortgage, as Jasmine will expand on, it may be that those long-term borrowing costs are coming down. But the governor was very, very determined to convey to everybody that he thinks interest rates are going to have to go up more before they actually peak.
Yeah, you've got an on-the-money graphic telling us the story.
We can see here the path of interest rates, if we can bring the graphic up now. Back in 2014, 2016 there, after the Brexit vote, the Bank of England panicked, lowered interest rates to 0.25%. They then went up incrementally. Then they plunged back down in early 2020 and stayed at 0.1%. There's the lockdown. Since the lockdown, we've had successive interest rate rises now, up to 3%. Interest rates are still less than they are in the United States. That partly explains why the pound is weak. The fact that the governor has signalled interest rates may peak at a lower level than previously thought. That's why the pound has lost about a cent since Andrew Bailey made that announcement just over an hour ago. But amidst the doom and gloom and amidst the predictions of recession, there is some good news that the Bank of England is willing to risk its credibility to say these inflation projections that the markets are assuming, these interest rate projections that the markets are assuming, are probably now too gloomy. A Bank of England governor does not say something like that lightly.
No.
They must really believe it.
But let's return to the gloom, Jasmine, if you don't mind, because there is a flip side to this, and that is Andrew Bailey. They have this quarterly statement where they look at the snapshot of the economy going ahead, and he's talking about perhaps 2 years of recession. He's talking about GDP, i.e. the growth in the economy being either flat or actually going down, and even bringing that word up, unemployment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think he's right. As it happens, I am deeply unimpressed by pretty much everything that Andrew Bailey is doing at the moment. He's the man, remember, who said that the science is settled, where have we heard that before, that printing money does not create inflation. Yes, it does. And we are seeing the example of this. So he is saying all sorts of things. Frankly, I'm not taking too much notice of what he's saying, but I do think that we are coming into a long recession. I do think that we are going to have quite a lot of, as you say, unemployment. And I think that interest rates at some point will have to be brought down. In fact, there's an argument to say that they're putting them up now in order to be able to bring them down later on when the economy is in such a parlous state.
Is it putting it too severely to say or they're crashing the economy to try and build it back up again?
Feels like it. Well, I don't know, yes, exactly if they're wanting to crash it. They're wanting to do something. I think they're wanting to look like they're doing something. And it's not just our Bank of England, our central bank. They're doing it in America. They're doing it in Europe as well. And they all tend to just sort of copy each other, it seems to me. But I think they're doing something so that later on they have a bit of wiggle room, they can bring it down again.
Yeah, there will be those people who are trying to understand why, when they've got less and less money in their pockets and therefore not spending, which is normally what pushes inflation up, why the bank thinks higher interest rates will actually dampen down inflation.
Because inflation is 5 times the Bank of England's target.
2%.
Partly because of the money printing that Jasmine is talking about. She and I have been among lone voices among British financial commentary for 10 years warning about the inflationary dangers of quantitative easing. And also because I think it's fair to say, while the governor's got a really tough job, the Bank of England should have moved much faster to raise interest rates. And then they wouldn't have had to go up so much and there could have been less pain. But look, squeezing inflation out of the system is always painful. That's why we give the job to technocrats who can't be unelected rather than politicians who would be so concerned about getting votes in the short term that they wouldn't make the decisions that are the right thing for the long term. Of course, this is a very, very difficult time. But I would say, while the rhetoric used by the governor was pretty doom-inducing, I do think it's good news that they're saying that interest rates will peak at a lower rate than we previously thought.
Yeah, now, I know we normally don't sort of put you into the political sphere, but of course there is this aspect that on November the 17th, we've got this autumn statement, and we could be facing higher taxes as well. What on earth can households do to try and mitigate the pain? I mean, they are facing real cuts in their wages. OK, if you've got a bit of money, you might get more on interest rate now in your interest account. But it's not really going to make that much difference, given how much everything's going up.
Yes, exactly. I mean, even if you get 3% or maybe more, some top-rate savings accounts may do that, you're still losing because inflation
7%.
is at 7%, 10.1%. I mean, it's you might as well not bother. And I'm saying to people, don't put any more into savings than you absolutely have to as your sort of savings safety net. And
but should you be paying debt down, though?
Yes, I would say that is the big thing. If you do have extra money, forget savings accounts, pay off debt, pay off your mortgage if you can. I mean, many people will have fixed. Now, about 3/4 of mortgage holders have fixed. But even there, I would say pay it off, but particularly pay off the expensive debt, credit cards. I'm talking to people who are using credit cards to buy, ordinary stuff day to day.
25% APR rates and above.
It is. This is the problem. I mean, even though it's gone up to 3%, wow, our basic rate. It is, as you say, it's 25% with now, 25% for credit card interest rates. So that's the last thing we should do. Just pay it all off as quickly as you possibly can.
OK, well, thank you for that sage advice and trying to lift the doom and gloom, but more analysis to come. And in fact, we're now joined by Ian Begg, Professor at the European Institute of the London School of Economics. Ian, thanks very much indeed for joining us. It is a pretty sobering snapshot that we've had from Andrew Bailey. Do you think he was being unduly pessimistic, though?
I think he's being realistic. Maybe not as pessimistic as he might have been, because he doesn't tell us how deep the recession that he anticipates is likely to be. It's quite possible that we could have a shallow recession, because if we have -1%, -2%, that's nothing like we endured during the COVID crisis, nor indeed during the global financial crisis in 2009. I think that what we're likely to see is inflation peaking very soon and edging downwards quite rapidly, so that the more dramatic increases in interest rates that have been talked about by so many commentators are just not going to happen. And so it's something we have to endure for the short term, but isn't going to last all that long.
But how effective will, and monetary policy, interest rate rises, there are a blunt instrument. How effective is this going to be if these things are outside of control? Wholesale gas prices, grain prices from Ukraine, all being fuelled by what's happening in Crimea and elsewhere?
Well, they are only partly effective, because what we sometimes fail to explain to people is that there's something called the terms of trade. The price we have to pay for things we import from countries like Russia or the Gulf states against the price that they pay for our goods and services. We have lost on this because there's been a relative price rise, with energy prices becoming more expensive and everything we export becoming less expensive. And bluntly, that reduces our standard of living. There's not that much that interest rates can do to deal with this. But what is important from the Bank of England's point of view is to manage expectations that inflation will not get worse. If they succeed in managing those expectations, you would expect to see interest rates rising less than a lot of people are expecting, and inflation receding more rapidly than you might expect.
OK, now we had Andrew Bailey previously saying he was flying blind, or the bank was flying blind, because, of course, they had to wait until November the 17th for this autumn statement from Jeremy Hunt. How much is that going to affect the picture? Because if we do clearly get, substantial tax rises, that's going to slow the economy down even more.
It will, but the position we had under Liz Truss was going to be that the Bank of England was trying to slow the economy while the Treasury was trying to accelerate the economy. And that's like driving with one foot on the brake and one foot on the accelerator. It was not going to work. When what the Treasury does and the Bank of England does are working far more harmoniously, we can expect it to have a greater and more positive impact and to lessen the dangers we face.
Well, very quickly, does that mean both feet on the brake at the same time?
Yes, both feet on the brake, but more lightly than would otherwise have been the case. So instead of the car spinning in circles, it slows.
Yeah. Well, let's just hope they don't crash the car into the wall. Professor Ian Begg at London School of Economics, thanks very much indeed for joining us with your analysis. And, of course, more as we get the figures coming through. Now, back to the politics. Suella Braverman continuing to come under increased pressure to get a grip on the migrant chaos, visiting Dover and Manston today, amid the international criticism now of her claims that the UK faced an invasion of migrants. Well, the illegal conditions at the Manston processing centre in Kent, with around 3,500 people currently being detained there for weeks on end, at a site intended for just 1,600 overnight. It's also emerged some of the migrants taken from the processing centre were then abandoned at Victoria Station due to a massive Home Office error, according to the charity worker involved in helping them. Let's speak with our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who's down at Manston. Of course, he broke the story about this processing centre for us last week. Mark, what time are we expecting her there, and what is she likely to see?
Well, we're told between 1:30 and 2 o'clock that the Home Secretary is due to arrive here. She was late in arriving at the Dover processing centre, sister processing centre to this one. Effectively, when these people come across the channel in the small boats, they're taken usually, first of all, to Dover if they're landed at that end. If they're landed further down the coast, then they'll come here to Manston. But even those that have been at Dover often then end up coming to Manston for additional checks. It is exactly that, a processing centre where their fingerprints and biometric details are taken, where they're interviewed briefly, where they're checked by medical staff and given warm food and clothing before they're then allocated spaces usually in hotels across the country. But of course we know that process stalled for a while. It was alleged that the Home Secretary had deliberately tried to block the requisition of more hotels. Now that's something she vehemently denies. As she spoke to the House of Commons in an emergency statement, she said that 30 such hotels had been requisitioned while she's been Home Secretary, so that she has not, she claimed, blocked it in any way. But what has happened is, because we've had very significant numbers of people coming across the English Channel in the last week or two, that has just built up here at Manston and at Dover, with the staff and the resources not able to process them quickly enough. And that's why we've seen currently here about 3,500. There was 4,000 until yesterday, down to 3,500. Yeah. Robert Jenrick, who is the Immigration Minister, Mark, was saying that he was hopeful that they would be able to return to that more sustainable level of about 1,500 being processed here for no more than 24 hours.
Yeah, doing the job it's designed to do. Mark, I have to ask you too, you were bringing us the story about the Albanian people traffickers, gangs, and of course their involvement in the cannabis trade here in Britain. What do you make of this reaction from the Albanian Prime Minister, Edi Rama, accusing Britain of becoming a madhouse and trying to find scapegoats where failed policies were to blame?
Well, look, he's the Prime Minister of that country. He's defending his country and his fellow countrymen and women, but perhaps his anger would be better vented at those elements in his own country who are organising for the criminal trafficking of individuals across the English Channel. Many of them, as I've been told by senior sources, and as I speak actually, another bus heading in here to Manston. So this process that Robert Jenrick was on about, Mark, of getting the buses in, getting them on and getting them out to hotels, we can see actively that is taking place. As I was saying, we've been told by sources that many of the Albanians who are arriving on small boats are coming under instruction for criminal gangs in this country or indeed back in Albania. Many of them going and working in the likes of cannabis farms. The Albanian crime groups are taking an increasing dominant role in criminal activity in this country. They control the vast majority of cannabis farms, certainly in the north of the UK, the cocaine trade in the south. They are, as far as the authorities are concerned, many of those who are coming across going to be involved in criminal activity. Not all of them, of course, and many of them are going to claim that they are victims of people trafficking, that they're modern slaves in that sense, and that puts them into a system that is protracted because, like the asylum process, they claim that they're a victim of modern slavery. They go into the system and they can be here for, well, we're told many, many months, if not years.
Mark at Manston for the moment, thank you for that. Back to you, of course, when the Home Secretary appears and to get the very latest. Thanks very much indeed. Well, coming up, the GB News People's Poll and what you've been telling us. Labour's lead is down, but they're still leading the Conservatives, in your estimation, by a massive 26%. Olivia Utley with more on those results. But first, let's take a short break.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back to GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst, and we can now bring you the results of our latest People's Poll, what you've been telling us. Well, as the migrant crisis continues, the latest poll revealing that 58% of you think that the British government has lost control of our borders, the country's borders. Only 14%, the other end of the scale there, thinking that the government is actually in control. Well, on the issue of Albanian migrants, we've just been discussing that with Mark White, of course. 61% think they should be asked to return to Albania, though that won't go down well with the Albanian Prime Minister, who's accused Britain of being a madhouse. And in the latest voting intentions, well, Labour's lead has been cut from 31 to 26%, a fall of 4 points in past week, Conservative recovery continuing. But it still means Labour there are on 47%, Conservatives 21%, and the Lib Dems on 10%. Olivia Utley is joining us now from our political desk. Olivia, clearly the Labour lead is still substantial, but indications that a new Prime Minister and a new Chancellor has made some difference at least.
Yes, Rishi Sunak's definitely made a little bit of headway there. But going back to the first question in the poll, it's becoming very clear that Rishi Sunak has absolutely no chance at all of winning election for the Conservatives unless he can get this illegal immigration issue under control. And it's emerged very quickly into his premiership as the most important and pressing problem facing him. The concern with Albanian migrants is clearly huge. And the way that Robert Jenrick, the immigration minister, has talked about addressing it is by creating a bespoke plan for Albanian migrants where their applications for political asylum would be processed very quickly and then they would be deported if necessary. Well, that's easily said, might not be very easily done.
If Albania takes them back, looking at what the Albanian Prime Minister has said about Britain being a madhouse and that they were trying to find scapegoats when failed policies were to blame.
Well, yeah, exactly. And it's a bit slightly confusing statement from the Albanian Prime Minister there because if they're not being trafficked into the country, then what sort of what are they fleeing from in Albania?
But looking at the bigger picture again, we had Sir Keir Starmer trying to tell the government to get a grip. And obviously it's not just the Prime Minister, it is the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who is in Dover and Manston today. But there's no clear way out of this, is there? You know, no matter what political party comes in, there is some kind of systemic problem about how you process so many people with what seems to be so few Home Office staff.
So few Home Office staff. Home Office is such a big department. They're often argued that it should be slimmed down or split off into different departments, too big for purpose, really. And the other issue is that the only thing that Labour seems to be able to say about it is that we need to work more closely with the French, which, of course, Conservative Home Secretaries have been trying to do. But, again, it's more easily said than done.
Yeah.
The other problem is, of course, the Modern Slavery Act, which was hugely hyped up by Theresa May, but has turned into this big loophole in our immigration system. And anyone who's claiming to be the victim of modern slavery can get political asylum in this country, or at least they can go through the whole process and will be defended by human rights lawyers who very much want them to stay.
Very quickly, what's your assessment of Suella Braverman's position at the moment? As we say, she's visiting Dover and Manston today. Mark White is following that for us. He can't get rid of her this quickly, can he? He's got to stay with her for the time being.
Well, I don't think he can get rid of her quickly because his political future feels very tied up with hers. He promoted her in that cabinet reshuffle, didn't promote any other of the sort of heroes of the right of the party. Kemi Badenoch's an obvious example. And in only promoting her, it's meant that the whole of the right of the party, both inside Westminster and outside, have sort of coalesced around her. And if he were to lose her, then his parliamentary support, which he's obviously completely dependent on to get anything done, would be massively undermined.
And an admittance of his own failure, perhaps, in selecting in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
Olivia, thank you very much indeed. And, of course, that results of that poll available for you on our website and our app too. Coming up, the latest on the trial of nurse Lucy Letby. She denies murdering 7 babies, attempting to kill 10 others, will be live outside the court for you. First, let's get a news update with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. It's just gone 1:31. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England has warned the UK is facing a tough road ahead as it raises interest rates to tackle soaring inflation. The base rate is being raised by 0.75 percentage points to 3%, which is the single biggest increase in more than 3 decades. The Chancellor says the government's priority is to restore stability, sort out public finances and get debt falling. But Jeremy Hunt admits there are no easy options. The Bank of England warns the country is on course for its longest recession since the 1920s, with its Governor, Andrew Bailey, saying they had to act. Home Secretary Suella Braverman will visit the Manston Processing Centre in Kent this afternoon as she comes under increasing pressure over her handling of the migrant crisis. It follows this morning's visit to the Dover facility. The government's facing potential legal action over conditions at Manston. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan has been shot in the leg with a gunman opening fire on his convoy. The assassination attempt happened as he was leading a protest march on the capital Islamabad to demand a snap election. Mr. Khan has been taken to hospital. His injuries aren't thought to be life-threatening. A new report examining the emergency response to the Manchester Arena bombing will be published in the next hour. It's the second of 3 official reports by Chairman Sir John Saunders and will consider whether some of the victims might have survived had the emergency services responded more quickly. 22 people were killed and hundreds injured in a suicide attack at an Ariana Grande concert in 2017. And the Kremlin has summoned the UK ambassador to Russia after claiming British specialists were involved in a Ukrainian drone strike on its Black Sea fleet in Crimea. Moscow says Saturday's attack was carried out under the guidance and leadership of the Royal Navy, a claim the UK denies. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1186 and €1.1468. The price of gold is £1,450.51 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,113 points.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB Newsday and our top story, interest rates on the rise again. Just to remind you, the Bank of England increasing the base rate by 0.75%, the sharpest rise we've seen since Black Wednesday. Someone who remembers that well, joining us now, Sir Charlie Bean, Professor of Economics at the London School of Economics and former Deputy Governor of the Bank, in charge indeed of interest rate policy or monetary policy. Sir Charlie, thanks for joining us. We heard Andrew Bailey saying he was flying blind on this decision ahead of this November 17th autumn statement. Given that, has he done the right thing by going for a full 0.75% rise?
Well, the first thing to be said is that the Monetary Policy Committee are always flying blind to some degree, because there's always uncertainty about what's going to happen in the future. Now, it's obviously the case that because the Chancellor has postponed his fiscal statement, they didn't know what's going to be in that. The Chancellor hasn't made his final decisions yet. But at least they knew the rough contours that Jeremy Hunt had already unwound 2/3 of the spending in the medium term that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng had committed to. And they've signalled that further fiscal consolidation is on the way, even if the details aren't known.
And that means tax rises and spending cuts.
There was uncertainty, but not so much uncertainty they couldn't act. The other thing is that even before the mini-budget, if you go back to late August, the bank had indicated that bank rate was on a rising trajectory to, probably somewhere 3-4%, and they were well below that. So it was perfectly sensible for them to make a significant move today. Just yesterday, the Federal Reserve raised by 75 basis points. The ECB has made some big moves in the past as well. So the markets were expecting this, and it wasn't surprising that they went through with a 0.75 percentage point increase.
Is it the right thing to do? Because previously we having a description of the government having its foot on the accelerator in terms of the Chancellor, the bank with its foot on the brake. It now seems we may have 2 feet on the brake at the same time and really slamming those brakes on, with warning that we might have a 2-year-long recession and unemployment raising its head once more.
Well, the first thing to be said is the economy does need to slow to get inflation under control in the medium term. That's just an unfortunate consequence of the fact that we've had this huge external price shock associated with what's happening in the Ukraine. The bank can't do anything to offset that, but what they're trying to do is make sure that it doesn't get ingrained in the system, that wage inflation tries to compensate for the higher prices in the way that happened in the 1970s. But there's some important sort of, let's call it a silver lining. It's not quite good news.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah.
The thing is, at the moment, it's being described as the longest recession and so forth. Importantly, the bank's forecasts are conditioned on the path of interest rates, which is present in the market at the moment. And under that forecast, not only do you have quite a deep and prolonged downturn, it also leads to inflation undershooting the 2% target 2 or 3 years ahead. So in that sense, it overachieves.
Right, yeah.
What the bank is actually doing today is signalling that it doesn't think the bank rate will have to rise as much as the markets think it will. So the markets think it will peak at around about 5%. What the bank is implicitly saying is, yes, they'll probably have to rise a bit further from where they are today after the decision, but maybe just to round about 4%, something like that.
Okay.
Exactly where we'll see next year. But there's a little bit of good news there.
I'm so glad to...
It's not as high as the markets think.
OK, just a last thought before you go. What should be happening then with the pay rounds? Because obviously you mentioned about the inflationary pressure of pay deals. We've got the NHS workers who are striking. We've got the train workers that are out, the Royal Mail and so on. And you know, we are getting into a winter of discontent. What should be done on actually getting those wage demands sorted out?
Well, I mean, to some extent, this is up to individual employers who need to recruit and retain the staff necessary to produce their output. Workers will be more likely to be able to extract higher pay awards while the labour market is tight. And actually, one of the key things that complicates the bank's decision-making at the moment is the labour market is still actually very tight. Despite the fact we're talking about a downturn, unemployment is presently at historical lows, vacancies are still very high, and those are the circumstances when you get these second-round effects onto pay. Similarly, it's not just pay that counts, it's also businesses' ability to push through the cost increases that they're seeing through into final prices. And they're less inclined to do that if the economy is a bit weaker.
Yeah. OK, well, Sir Charlie, as ever, thank you for talking to us and bringing us a little bit of a silver lining. Always very grateful for that. Thanks for your time.
You're very welcome. Cheers.
OK, thank you. Let's return now to the breaking news we've been bringing you this afternoon with former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan being shot in the leg. What they say his support is an apparent assassination attempt. It is understood he's out of danger. Imran Khan had been leading a protest march to demand snap elections. Let's speak now to Pakistani journalist Bina Shah. Bina, the latest we are getting is that he was taken to hospital, shot in either the foot or the leg, but not said to be in danger.
That is correct. The report started coming in about 2 hours ago. Imran Khan had been leading a long march, that's his name, that's his term for this series of protests where he and his core party membership stand on top of a container which is on top of a truck. And they move very slowly through the Punjab heartland. They make speeches every evening. They round up a lot of popular support for his movement against the sitting government. And that's where he was shot today.
OK, an indication just how volatile the state of politics is out there.
That's correct. And I mean, Pakistan has seen too many of these assassinations and assassination attempts and so on and so forth. It's all an attempt to derail the democratic process is what a lot of people are saying.
And what of Imran Khan's PTI party? I mean, there were these allegations of corruption. And is that what may have fueled this attack?
Not at all. Not at all. It's very unclear at the moment, so I wouldn't like to comment on what has really fueled the assassin, the person who has been caught as the alleged assassin or would-be assassin. But there have been so many accusations of foul play, of danger to Imran Khan's life, many things going on under the surface. So, as you say, it is very volatile and the situation is very fluid.
Yeah. What is his position? Because effectively he's been disqualified for running for office. Is that right?
That is correct. He says that all the allegations are untrue and they are attempts by his opponents to smear him, to disqualify him. He was removed from office in a no-confidence vote back in April, but he enjoys tremendous popularity with the people of Pakistan. And he says that that's what makes them so afraid of him.
Yeah, and of course, as you're indicating, we remember what happened with Benazir Bhutto back in 2007. What is likely to happen now to politics there? Are we likely to see an end to these public displays and people being a lot more conscious about security?
I think there are going to be calls from certain quarters for Imran Khan's long march to now cease. They're going to cite safety concerns, security concerns. It really is the responsibility of the sitting Punjab government to protect him, even though he's in the opposition. So things are going to get a lot more tricky before they become clear.
Bina Shah, thank you for joining us there in Karachi and bringing us the very latest. Thank you very much indeed. Now, the World Cup, under 3 weeks away, as we keep telling you, kicking off 20th of November, the opening game of Qatar versus Ecuador. And it's going to be a unique competition, not only for the time of year that it's taking place, but also question marks over the freedom of fans and the country's human rights record. Well, the World Cup organisers have been holding another news conference to update us on preparations ahead of the tournament. Joining us now to give us more is sports journalist Ben Jacobs. And Ben, we were being told that the number of England and Wales fans likely to go, not that great, but clearly there are concerns about what will be meeting them when they get out to Qatar.
Yes, exactly. The purpose of this press conference was for largely government and local organising committee members to talk about the infrastructure ranging from health and safety to the ID cards that will be needed. And of course, this so-called Heya card in particular that everybody must sign up for, and fears perhaps that there will be data breaches, and fans may naturally be concerned about that. But it was also an opportunity to talk about the airport and the process of immigration, right through to what if you have a medical emergency and what kind of facilities will be on site at all of the different stadiums as well. And I think that the headline, certainly from the press conference, was that if you have this so-called Heya card, which is essential when you come in because it contains your visa, then you will get free medical care even as a foreign national. So that's one main headline. And then as far as England and Wales fans are concerned, the other thing that we've learned over the last week is that British police will be out there as well to act as a so-called buffer.
Yeah, but they've got no policing powers as such. They are just there effectively as liaison officers. Is that right?
Yes, to some extent. I mean, it's very common at any World Cup or major tournament to send out local police because they know the fan bases. But when in Qatar, they won't be able to do anything legally without working in conjunction with local authorities because the laws are obviously different. But what they will be able to do is offer advice, and if situations escalate, they will be able to help with the likely deportation or exit, if we're to term it in a slightly softer way, from the country. So the fear of fans is obviously that they're going to go out there, they're going to get into trouble, or maybe they're going to do something that we don't construe as that troublesome and they're going to find themselves in jail. And the authorities are saying that if there is an eventuality where an England or a Wales fan gets into trouble, like excess drinking, they could be spot fined, or if it's more severe, then the British police will help get them out of the country rather than risking a situation where they end up being charged criminally under the so-called Sharia law within Qatar.
Yeah, and of course the consequences thereof. What about the heat then? I mean, are they going to be allowed just to wear flip-flops and shorts and T-shirts? Because obviously dress code is another tricky area.
That's another thing that's been addressed, and obviously the dress code is very different to a lot of fans will be used to. So there are areas, particularly Western areas within Doha, where fans can wear shorts and T-shirts. In the malls, they can show flesh as well, and in the stadiums, they can obviously wear short-sleeve shirts of their countries. So there's not a huge issue around that bar or beach or mall or stadium or fan park. But when walking around Doha, there's also areas where fans could stumble into, and they might then have to dress more conservatively. And the challenge is knowing where you can and can't go. And that's where, according to this press conference, the volunteers are going to be key in educating and guiding, and to some extent the police as well. And the final thing I think I would say very briefly is just that it is winter. So at night, fans should also be aware, regardless of the problems and the rules, that having lived out there myself, it gets pretty cold as well. It could even rain. So pack a jumper would also be my advice. It will be colder than a lot of fans realise, particularly after 5 p.m.
OK, so take your umbrella to Qatar as well, just in case. Ben, thanks very much indeed for updating us. Thank you. Now to other matters, and the trial of the nurse Lucy Letby continuing at Manchester Crown Court. Letby, who's 32, is denying the murders of 7 babies and the attempted murders of 10 others at the Countess of Chester Hospital between June 2015 and June 2016. The mother of child D has been giving evidence to the court. The newborn girl allegedly murdered by a fatal injection of air into her bloodstream. Let's speak to our Northwest reporter, Sophie Reaper, who's joining us outside the court. And Sophie, these are tragic circumstances being outlined in these court proceedings.
Absolutely tragic. We're into day 19 of the Lucy Letby trial now here at Manchester Crown Court. And as you say, the former nurse has been charged with the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of a further 10 babies while she was working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital. She denies all of the charges against her. Now, so far this week, the focus has primarily been on child C, but today that shifted to start to consider the circumstances around child D. Now, today we've heard for the first time from child D's mother. This is the first time we've heard live evidence from one of the parents involved in this case. She told the court about the moments leading up to her daughter's death. She described how one of the doctors was attempting to resuscitate her daughter and how her and her husband had to stand there and watch their baby die. She also said that during the resuscitation attempts, the doctor had a phone held up to his ear by one of the nurses, and when prompted, she told the court that she believed that nurse to be Lucy Letby. Now, the prosecution then asked her if she remembered seeing Lucy Letby at any other time, and she said that she did. On one of her visits to see her daughter, she said that Lucy Letby was hovering around when all she really wanted was some privacy. We've also heard a written statement from baby D's father today, and he also recalled the moments leading up to his daughter's death. He said he couldn't remember seeing Lucy Letby in the room, but that he wasn't focused on anyone else, although he did say he remembered there was a real sense of urgency and that he knew it was a very serious situation. We're expecting the focus to remain on child D now until sometime next week.
Sophie at Manchester Crown Court, thanks very much indeed. Back to you, of course, as we get more from that court case. Well, let's stay in Manchester now. More than 2 years since the public inquiry into the Manchester Arena attack, with Volume 2 of the report expected to be published later today. The long-awaited findings into the emergency response being laid out in full, with a total of 291 witnesses and experts giving evidence. The inquiry chairman, Sir John Saunders, expected to give a statement at 2:30, we're being told, assessing the adequacy of the emergency response and the circumstances of the deaths of each of those who lost their lives. We're looking ahead to that report. We're joined now by the Labour MP for Blackley and Broughton and member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee too, Graham Stringer. Mr. Stringer, thank you for joining us. And clearly, lessons trying to be learned is the phrase we hear, but also for the families involved, they want to know in detail what went wrong.
I think we already know a great deal of what went wrong. There were failures of communication between the police. There were failures in the command structure. The fact is that the emergency services didn't arrive in some cases until 2 hours later. So I think we know those general issues. What we don't know is the judgment the inquiry will come to about individual circumstances of injuries and deaths. You say in the introduction that it will be lessons learned. In one sense, one can't argue about that, but the government response, the public response, is nearly always lessons learned and new sets of administrative procedures. I'm not sure it's ever adequate, that. I think one of the things that has gone wrong with this and in other cases is that people expect for the emergency services for them to be certain it's safe. And I don't think that can ever happen. And if the firefighters and the ambulance people have to wait until they're certain it's safe, then it's pretty certain that some people are going to suffer unnecessarily and potentially die. So I think the way safety is ascertained is important.
Yeah, this was a central question, of course, with those paramedics saying that they weren't going to go in until it had been established whether there was a secondary device, for instance. So the protocol's there for the best reasons, but perhaps one can over-prepare for these things.
I think the protocols are there for the best reasons, but I think if you're a firefighter, and the firefighters I've talked to in this emergency and other emergencies actually want to get there and help people. And that's true, I'm sure, of the ambulance service. And you can never be certain. There will always be an inquiry, but I think it is better left to the people on the ground to do as well as they can and get to the people who are suffering as quickly as they can.
And one reflects it's not just the families of those who died, of course, that many of these emergency workers will be suffering themselves as a result of this, and the sort of guilt complex as to, well, perhaps we should have done more, we could have done more.
Absolutely. I mean, some years ago there was an aeroplane fire, and I think 55 people died on the runway at Manchester Airport when I was involved with the airport at the time. And I talked to the firefighters at the time when they knew that a large number of people had died, and afterwards, and they were in tears. And I know that it wasn't their failure, they did their best, but they felt as though they'd failed, because that is the reason for their existence, to get there to save people. And I'm sure that the emergency services, the ambulance people and the firefighters will feel exactly the same about the Manchester Arena.
Indeed. Yes, I remember the case, of course, all those passengers on the BA flight, many of them dying from smoke inhalation, despite the best efforts to get to them. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And, of course, we're expecting the details coming through now at 2:30. But let's get a latest update on the weather for you now.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
On Mark Dolan Tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Welcome back. Good afternoon. It's just gone 2 o'clock. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Bank of England has warned the UK is facing a tough road ahead as it raised the interest rate to tackle soaring inflation. The base rate is going up by 0.75 percentage points to 3%, which is the single biggest rise in more than 3 decades. The Chancellor says the government's priority is to restore stability, sort out public finances and get debt falling. But Jeremy Hunt admits there are no easy options. The Bank of England says the country is on course for its longest recession since the 1920s, with its Governor Andrew Bailey saying they had to act.
People should not have to worry about inflation as they go about their daily business. That's why we've been raising interest rates and did so again today. Low and stable inflation is the bedrock of a stable economy, a predictable economy in which people can go about their lives and plan for their futures with confidence. An economy in which hard-earned money keeps its value. If we do not act forcefully now, it will be worse later on. And as the forecast we are publishing today shows, it is a tough road ahead.
Well, Labour has accused the Conservatives of losing control of the economy. The Shadow Chancellor says her party's plan for growth is what the country needs.
We could and should be doing so much better than this. We're a fantastic country with great skills, a great industry, and yet we are not firing on all cylinders. The government have had 12 years to tackle these challenges, and yet here we are with low growth and a cost of living crisis. Labour's plan for economic stability, for tackling the cost of living crisis, and a real plan for economic growth is what we need right now.
Elsewhere, Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan has been shot in the leg after a gunman opened fire on his convoy. The assassination attempt happened as he was leading a protest march on the capital Islamabad to demand a snap election. Mr. Khan has been taken to hospital. His injuries aren't thought to be life-threatening. Home Secretary Suella Braverman is visiting the Manston Immigration Centre this afternoon as she comes under increasing pressure over her handling of the migrant crisis. It follows this morning's visit to the Dover immigration facility. The government faces potential legal action over conditions at the Manston Centre in Kent. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has backed Ms Braverman's handling of the issue, saying she's taken significant steps in addressing overcrowding there. A new report examining the emergency response to the Manchester Arena bombing will be published in the next half hour. It's the second of 3 official reports by Chairman Sir John Saunders and will consider whether some of the victims might have survived had the emergency services responded more quickly. 22 people were killed and hundreds injured in a suicide attack at an Ariana Grande concert in 2017. Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen faces being suspended from the House of Commons for a series of breaches of the rules. The Standards Committee has recommended the MP for North West Leicestershire be suspended for 5 sitting days over what it calls a cavalier attitude to the rules. Mr Bridgen says he's extremely disappointed but accepts the findings. The Kremlin has protested to the UK ambassador to Russia after claiming British specialists were involved in a Ukrainian drone strike on its Black Sea fleet in Crimea. Crowds chanted and held placards calling Britain a terrorist state as the British ambassador was summoned to the Russian Foreign Ministry headquarters. Moscow says Saturday's attack was carried out under the guidance and leadership of the Royal Navy, a claim the UK denies. The Russian Foreign Ministry says the UK's actions could result in unpredictable and dangerous consequences. The Japanese Coast Guard says North Korea has fired a 3rd missile towards Japan. Warnings were triggered in Japan's northern regions earlier today, where people were told to stay indoors. The Japanese Defense Ministry says one of them was an intercontinental ballistic missile that failed mid-flight. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has described it as outrageous. North Korea's multiple launches come as the US and South Korea stage large-scale military exercises. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Mark with GB Newsday.
Rhiannon, thanks very much and welcome back to GB Newsday. With the Bank of England raising the base rate as expected by 0.75%, so it's up to 3%, and that's the sharpest hike since Black Wednesday back in 1992, all to tackle inflation. But Labour have called for a general election, claiming that the Tories now lost control of the economy. Let's listen to Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor.
I know that families will be incredibly concerned about these increases in interest rates, the biggest increase for over 30 years. And that's going to mean higher borrowing costs, higher mortgage rates, and also higher costs for businesses. But people are not in a position to withstand these sorts of interest rate rises when we've got rising food prices, rising energy bills, and now higher mortgage rates as well. The government have left us exposed because of low growth and a cost of living crisis. The problem is, if you look at league tables from the International Monetary Fund, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, they have the UK close to the top of the league table when it comes to inflation and close to the bottom of the league table when it comes to economic growth. We could and should be doing so much better than this. We're a fantastic country with great skills, a great industry, and yet we are not firing on all cylinders. The government have had 12 years to tackle these challenges, and yet here we are with low growth and a cost of living crisis. Rishi Sunak, when he was a Chancellor, took months and months to introduce a windfall tax, and when he did so, it was not the windfall tax that we needed, because it handed loads of money back to the oil and gas companies with investment allowances for more fossil fuel extraction. The government need to get serious. The huge profits that are being made, and we've seen it this week with BP and Shell, should be taxed properly, because it is ordinary working people and businesses who are paying the price for the failure of the government to tax properly the windfall profits that are being made by the oil and gas giants. The news today about Andrew Bridgen is just another example of the lack of ethics and integrity at the heart of the Conservative Party. We saw it with Partygate. We saw it as well with the appointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary after breaking the ministerial code. This government have no respect for institutions, for ethics and integrity. That's why we need a general election now.
Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, speaking to us down in Plymouth in Devon. Well, let's get the reaction of our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, who's been crunching numbers. As Liam, the smoke clears. It's not necessarily all bad news, because obviously we've got the quarterly analysis from the bank, as well as the decision on the base rate itself. And they are saying, well, perhaps looking towards next year, things may not go up quite as much as they were originally expecting.
That's right. The Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey, as interest rates went up 0.75 percentage points to 3%, he was at pains to say he and the Monetary Policy Committee feel that the financial markets are overestimating where interest rates will actually peak. They've been penciling in 6.5% peak in interest rates. The Bank of England's now publicly saying, and it doesn't do this lightly, that interest rates should peak at 5.25%. That's lower than previously expected. At one reason the pound has fallen a bit since interest rates were announced at midday. And the reason that's good news, Mark, is that means if you're on a variable rate or you're on a fix and it's soon to expire, where the mortgage companies put the fixed rates going forward may be slightly lower than they previously thought, because they think interest rates now will peak at a lower rate. So those 2 and 5 year fixes that a lot of people are angsting about,
they're coming off at the moment.
They may actually be cheaper than we previously thought. But let's just put this in historic context. Let's have a look at a graphic, and GB News listeners on the radio will have to take my word for it. We see that back in 2014, interest rates were 0.5%, and then they fell to 0.25% in 2016 on that Brexit vote when the Bank of England panicked. They recovered a little bit, and then they went all the way down to 0.1% in the middle of the pandemic in 2020 and 2021. Since then, we've seen 8 successive interest rate rises, but this is the first time we've seen a 0.75 percentage point rise up to 3%. For 30 years, as you said,
like an escalator on that graph, up to 3%.
Indeed, and that is a scary graph. And why is the Bank of England doing this? The Bank of England is doing this not because it wants to. It's doing this because inflation, Mark, is 10.1%. It's 5 times the Bank of England's target.
Yeah, and it has a mandate, of course, to tackle it. And let's not forget, interest rates even higher in the States at 4%. But I thought it was quite interesting that Andrew Bailey actually came out with this comment. This is talking about mortgages. Rates for fixed-term mortgages should not need to rise as they have done, indicating perhaps that the mortgage market should pull back a little bit, and that's giving a bit of wriggle room for people perhaps in the next few months as they come off those fixed rates.
And this is the central conundrum, which it's hard to explain, but I'll try. Even as the Bank of England's base rates are going up, and we've just seen a really sharp increase, long-term borrowing costs for mortgage holders and other people on personal loans, if they're going to fix their rate for 2 or 5 years, may actually come down.
And that's linked to the gilt prices that we've talked about?
No, that's not linked to the gilt price. It's linked to the fact that the Bank of England thinks, because it thinks inflation will be tamed more quickly, that interest rates won't have to peak at 6 or 6.5% in the middle of next year.
Yeah.
They'll peak at more like 5.25% in the middle of the next year, which means if a mortgage is selling you money for 2 or 5 years, they should be charging less for that money because they'll have to pay less for that money.
Yeah. On the bigger picture and government debt, which is linked to gilts, clearly that's coming down as well. But we are getting a picture from the bank about the next 2 years that GDP, the growth in the economy, is going to be static or even will fall, i.e. we could be having a 2-year recession? Is that
I personally think that's... The governor talks about that as a scenario, as a possibility, rather than a prediction. Of course, the headline writers and the media have alighted on that, and a prediction becomes a dead certainty, doesn't it? I mean, but people like me and you are here to give a little bit of nuance and a bit of grown-up commentary, frankly. I think it's clear that the economy is, in danger of heading into recession now. On the other hand, this is a global phenomenon. And one of the upsides, if you like, of economic slowdown is that helps to bring inflation down. So interest rates then don't have to go up so much, which means there's less pain if you've actually got some debt.
And where does it leave Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak for November the 17th when we've got this autumn statement or budget? Because, of course, they're trying to soften us up by saying, ooh, tax rises made pretty substantial. Will this mean they have to temper their plans in any way? 2
things that spring to mind, Mark. The first thing is, yes, you're right. Because the Bank of England is saying a sharp slowdown is in the offing, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister will think really hard before going ahead with those, what Treasury sources are calling painful tax rises. They may temper those tax rises a little bit. On the other hand, because the Bank of England thinks now inflation will peak earlier and lower than we otherwise thought, government borrowing costs are coming down. That means the government has to spend less, and we're talking tens of billions of pounds a year, on debt interest payments, on its gilts, on the debt that it borrows from financial markets. And that, Mark, may mean a little bit more room for manoeuvre in the national accounts. So, again, another reason why taxes might not have to go up so much, why spending may not have to be slowed so much.
Labour have attacked the government for being out of control on migration. Rachel Reeves now attacking the government for being out of control on the economy. But are we getting a picture that the Bank of England and the Treasury are meshing a bit more now in terms of handling the economy?
Well, it's interesting. Earlier, you spoke to Professor Ian Begg at the LSE, someone who I've talked to over many years in the economy, got a lot of respect for. And he made the point that previously, the Bank of England seemed to have its foot on the brake, and the government under Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng seemed to have their foot on the accelerator. And there is something in that if policy isn't coordinated. On the other hand, sometimes you need a mix of policy because you don't want to completely crunch the economy. And sometimes a bit of fiscal expansion gives the Bank of England some scope to impose a bit more pain to bring down inflation.
So you use the clutch and change gear as well.
Sometimes it's about balanced policy, Bank of England and Treasury, rather than always doing the same thing in the same direction. But this is the central conundrum of economics. Nobody, Mark, said it was easy.
Keeps you in business. Liam, as ever, thank you. Let's head back to the politics and, of course, migration, as we were just alluding to. The big issue facing the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, and that migrant processing centre in Manson in particular. Let's get up to speed with our GB News Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who's been down there for us. And, of course, you were telling us last week the details about Manson, breaking that story, Mark. What is the Home Secretary seeing and learning there today?
Well, I mean, she's due here, we're told, any minute if she's running to time. She was a little late in getting to Dover and the processing centre there. Where we are is actually on a grassy embankment overlooking Manston Base itself. But hey, you don't want to see me when we can give you shots of a lovely country road in Kent instead, and the main gates there you're looking at for Manston. We're hearing what looks like, oh, it's a Chinook helicopter just in the distance is flying over. I don't think Suella Braverman is in that Chinook helicopter, but you never know. Of course, this is it was a former RAF base. It's Kent International Airport nearby as well, and it's housing at the moment, Mark, some 3,500 people. It was 4,000 until a day ago. They're trying to get that number down as rapidly as possible because the situation is intolerable and, quite frankly, it seems illegal as well, because by law you can't hold people in a processing centre like this for any more than 24 hours. I'm just going to ask Ben, our cameraman, actually to give you the shot further down the road. It might not be as interesting as the main gate, but that is the road that we're expecting the motorcade carrying the Home Secretary to come up to turn into the main gate here at Manston. That's what we're expecting, but you know, we just never know with these particular occasions. There is another entrance, but I think unlikely that the Home Secretary would go into that entrance itself. But she will be seeing, to answer your original point, just what they are doing to try to get the people here processed as quickly as possible, and what conditions are like, because we've heard reports of very, very concerning conditions. I spoke to a whistleblower just a few days back. At the weekend, our report was running, which that whistleblower, one of the 900 personnel who works at this base, said that the conditions really are very concerning because of the frustration amongst people being held here for sometimes up to a month in conditions that are not meant to be more than 24 hours, and they are concerned about the potential for very significant disorder here. There are regular outbreaks of violence, people that are here fighting amongst themselves. There are disputes between people from different countries that simply don't get on, but a lot of it, Mark, is just the frustration, I think, being held here for all this time.
Now, Mark, you were showing us earlier at that gate one of those coaches that have been coming and going, and we've got this report that as one of them headed up to Victoria, it literally allegedly dumped people at Victoria. It had to be helped by charity workers. Are we learning any more about what went wrong?
We aren't, in the sense that we've had no official statement from the Home Office on that as yet. It may be something that's forthcoming later, but there is no way that I can imagine that the Home Office would deliberately adopt a policy of dumping people in the middle of central London. In fact, one of the reasons why Robert Jenrick, the immigration minister, was saying that the people were here for as long as they are is because they have they're duty bound not to just send people out without arranging accommodation for them under the law. And actually, because 2,000 odd in the past week have arrived over the Channel, just requisitioning hotels very quickly to transfer these people to takes time. And he said that was one of the reasons why people were stacking up here at the likes of Manston and Dover while they get those hotel rooms. So they are very clearly saying that they know it would be illegal to try to just send people off without accommodation. So there's clearly been a mix-up, a bungle somewhere along the line fine. But if we ever get to the bottom of it, who knows? These things can be quite mysterious.
Yeah.
I'm sure that at some point the Home Office will be forthcoming in terms of a statement for us, Mark. But it looks as though you're looking at the main gate there. I just see the activity from the guards there in terms of the way that they're reacting. Clearly, I think they're expecting something fairly soon now.
OK, well, we'll head back to you as soon as we see the motorcade or the Chinook helicopter, whichever she decides on, as it arrives there at a very damp Manston. Mark, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Talking of the weather conditions, we're being warned apparently to brace for thunderstorms, hail, lightning after flooding, of course, has hit the south of England. 64 millimetres of rain before temperatures plunged to -2 Celsius. Weather details for you next.
Hi there, Aidan McGibbon here with the latest forecast from the Met Office. Further heavy showers to come in many places. Some of these will be thundery, but there'll be clear intervals in between, and increasingly clear skies will move in overnight. But for the time being, plenty of low pressure on the charts. One clearing away to the north, that brought the unsettled weather yesterday. Another one moving into the North Sea, that's clearing the rain from the southeast. But attention turns to the southwest, Wales, southwest England, and then later the English Channel coast. That's where the heavy showers will predominate, and we're going to see these turn thundery and perhaps persist along the coastline from Dorset to Kent, with the risk of 40 millimetres of rain overnight. So that could cause some issues, yellow warning in force. Otherwise, for most of the rest of the UK, we're going to see clearing skies. And for parts of northern England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, where we get some shelter from the breeze, temperatures dipping to -2 or -3 first thing. That would make it the coldest morning since, I'd say, the second week of October. And for many, it's a bright start, but there'll be further showers coming along. Not as lively as they've been at times this week. They're mostly going to affect northern and western Scotland, Northern Ireland, western parts of England and Wales. Otherwise, blue skies for many and temperatures at around average or just below. 13 or 14 in the south, 11 or 12 in the north. Into the evening, further showers come along for the western part of the UK at first, but otherwise clear spells and temperatures falling away ahead of the next weather system that's moving in. So perhaps a touch of frost first thing in the east, but in the west it's turning milder through the night as it turns wetter and increasingly windy. And that sets the scene for Saturday morning. A bright but chilly start in the east, a wet and breezy start in the west. Rain spreads east through the day and then it clears to showers. And so by Sunday, well, it's another changeable day with some rain lingering in the southeast, blustery showers elsewhere. Monday brings further spells of wind and rain.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Welcome back to GB Newsday. Just to update you, that was Suella Braverman in that Chinook helicopter that Mark White was telling us about, and a motorcade on the way there. So we'll bring you those pictures as she visits that processing centre. But let's head back to that decision on the base rate, interest rate, the Bank of England increasing it by 0.75% to 3%. It's the sharpest rise since 1989. Black Wednesday, remember that, or 1992 rather, also forecasting that the UK facing a very challenging two-year recession, which would be the longest on record. Let's see what the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has had to say about this.
Well, what my party has done is put in place a new Prime Minister. We also have a new Chancellor of the Exchequer. Today's news is going to be very tough for families with mortgages up and down the country, for businesses with loans. But there is a global economic crisis. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, say a third of the world's economy is now in recession. And the best thing the government can do if we want to bring down these rises in interest rates is to show that we're bringing down our debt. Families up and down the country have to balance their accounts at home, and we must do the same as a government.
But the evidence is very clear that there is a very significant UK component to this, and that your party bears responsibility for this.
Well, on the steps of Downing Street, the Prime Minister recognised that and said that he was there to fix that. And when I became Chancellor, within a couple of days, I reversed the measures in the mini-budget. So we're taking the difficult decisions. At the top of our mind are families, businesses, people who are worried about jobs, about bills to pay. We want to do what we can to help them, but we recognise the biggest single thing we can do is to help the Bank of England bring down inflation. And the bank is taking its measures, which it's announced today, but the government also has to play our part by producing national accounts that balance, so that we can show people that in the end we have sound money in this country. We're bringing down debt, and we're doing the same things that we're asking families to do up and down the country.
We have got migrants in this country so desperate they are writing letters in bottles and throwing them over the fence at processing centres, and migrants being abandoned on the streets of London. This government has lost control of migration, hasn't it?
Well, this government is proud that we as a country have a long tradition of showing compassion to people who seek asylum from overseas. We have a system that isn't working. To make sure that we get the situation under control, and then we're able to show everyone who comes to this country the kind of compassion that we're proud to do as Brits.
A lot of people are asking today, why isn't the Home Secretary out doing interviews like you are?
Well, the Home Secretary did a number of public appearances this week in Parliament. She's been prepared to face the music. And
why not today?
Well, she's been prepared to face the music, as I say, this week, and I'm sure you'll continue to have a chance to ask her questions.
And we hope that Mark White will be able to do that because, as we were saying, the Home Secretary has arrived at that Manston processing centre where, of course, the problems have been arriving by Chinook helicopter, no less. It was a former RAF base, after all. We'll be getting the latest from Mark White down there fairly shortly. Also, on that issue of migration, let's reflect that plenty of you have been telling us what you think on migration in the GB News poll. And we'll have the results of that coming up. Stay with us for that. But let's reflect in more detail what you've been telling us, what you think about what's going on. An email from Virginia that says, hi, none of this is down to the government. It's happening globally and is down to the price of oil and coming out of COVID. If we hadn't had a pandemic, none of this would have happened. This is what has caused it, but why has everyone forgotten about it? She's asking. State of the economy, of course, and what's happened with interest rates. John, meanwhile, says, definitely time for a new Conservative Party. Too full of wets, seldom appearing to vote, but destroying every sensible step. It's squandered its 80 majority, he says. Mark, meanwhile, saying we probably do have one of the worst Conservative governments since its conception, but I blame the worthless, inconsequential oppositions. If there'd been serious alternatives, this would have never happened. It's a very poor standard in Parliament. And just to tell you that our People's Poll will be showing you more of that in detail, with some progress for the Tories, but still a long way to catch up on Labour. First of all, Rhiannon's waiting for us with a news update. She's coming up for you now.
Thank you, Mark. It's 2:31, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Bank of England has warned the UK is facing a tough road ahead as it raises the interest rate to tackle soaring inflation. The base rate is being raised by 0.75 percentage points to 3%, the single biggest increase in more than 3 decades. The Chancellor says the government's priority is to restore stability, sort out public finances and get debt falling. But Jeremy Hunt admits there are no easy options. The Bank of England warns the country is on course for its longest recession since the 1920s, with its Governor Andrew Bailey saying they had to act. Home Secretary Suella Braverman has just arrived at the Manston Processing Centre in Kent as she comes under increasing pressure over her handling of the migrant crisis. It follows this morning's visit to the Dover immigration facility. The government's facing potential legal action over conditions at Manston. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan has been shot in the leg after a gunman opened fire on his convoy. The assassination attempt happened as he was leading a protest march on the capital Islamabad to demand a snap election. Mr. Khan has been taken to hospital. His injuries aren't thought to be life-threatening. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to GB Newsday. Let's alert you to the fact that we're going to go live to Manchester, to the Magistrates' Court, where the chairman of the inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombing, Sir John Saunders, will read a brief statement in response to his findings.
In the course of the evidence of what happened after the explosion, I saw CCTV evidence and video from body-worn cameras of the city room. That showed clearly the appalling aftermath of the explosion. It showed those who had died within seconds of the explosion. It showed victims with appalling injuries. I have considered post-mortem evidence and expert evidence which confirm that those who died did so as a result of injuries caused by a bomb exploding. There can be no question on the evidence that those who died as a result of the actions of Salman Abedi. Those actions also caused the severe injuries suffered by many people who attended the concert or were waiting to collect children who had attended. Those who have listened to the evidence will not be surprised that I am highly critical of many aspects of the rescue operation. Those criticisms must not overshadow our admiration for the courage of those who went into the city room without any hesitation to help the dying and the injured. There were members of the public. There were people who were working at the arena on the 22nd of May. There were British Transport Police officers, Greater Manchester Police officers, Travel Safe officers and paramedics who went into the city room to help others without regard for their own safety. While their courage should be recognised by me, and I do, what is most important at this time is that I identify what went wrong and recommend changes to ensure that the same mistakes are not made again. That is what has guided my approach throughout this inquiry. During the evidence, the suggestion was made that the Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service in particular, and the North West Ambulance Service to a lesser extent, were risk-averse. While there is a case for saying that some of the decisions made by some commanders were unduly cautious because of concerns they felt about the risks inherent in responding to a major emergency, there was no evidence that individual firefighters or members of the ambulance service were other than ready and willing to carry out their job of protecting and saving life. The evidence of the firefighters was that on the night of the attack they were angry that they had not been in the city room helping to rescue the injured. I did not find there was evidence to support any suggestion that the commanders making the decisions were risk-averse for their own safety. It is one thing to take a risk on your own behalf. It is another to send people under your control into a situation where they might be injured. Having said that, many things did go badly wrong, and it has been the job of this inquiry to identify them, work out if possible why they went wrong, and make recommendations to ensure, if possible, that they don't happen again. The criticisms that I have made are principally directed at organisations, and there were significant failings by a number of organisations in preparation and training for an emergency such as this, and in their actions on the night of the attack. I have also criticised some individuals for decisions that they took on the night. Some may think that to criticise individuals who were faced with an extremely difficult situation is harsh. But we rely on people in command positions to make the right decisions when faced with a complex emergency. None of them intended to make the wrong decision. Some had not had sufficient instruction or training, and others were doing their best to balance the need to help those who were injured with ensuring that people under their command were not put in a position which carried excessive risk. It has been my job to identify when and how things went wrong. So when incorrect decisions have been made, however understandable, I have had to identify them. I have not looked for scapegoats, and everyone who I have criticised has had the opportunity to respond to those criticisms, and I have taken their observations into account in my report to the extent that I accepted them. Many of the things that went wrong on the 22nd of May have gone wrong before, either in genuine emergencies or in exercises designed to test out the emergency services procedures. The best example of this is the failure of GESIP, the Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Programme. On the night of the 22nd of May, it failed almost completely. GESIP was introduced in response to the recommendations of Lady Hallett after the inquest she held into the death caused by the 7/7 bombings. GESIP is designed to ensure that any rescue attempt involving more than one of the emergency services is coordinated so that all follow the same plan and share information so that well-informed decisions can be taken. Had GESIP worked on the 26th of May, things could and should have been very different. There would have been a joint assessment of risk taken by all the emergency services, and the result of that should have been that there would have been more paramedics in the city room, using their skills to triage and, where necessary, using their life-saving skills to assist those who couldn't wait to be removed from the city room before they received treatment. Firefighters would have arrived on the scene to use their considerable skills to ensure an organised and safe removal of the injured to the station entrance, where they could receive assessment and treatment pending a rapid transfer to hospital. Instead, we heard heartbreaking evidence of the injured and the rescuers who were in the city room, hearing the sirens of ambulances, knowing paramedics were close by, expecting their imminent arrival, only for them not to arrive in the sort of numbers which were needed. Had firefighters got to the city room as soon as they could have done, they would have removed the injured using proper equipment which would have been safe and quick. Instead, the injured had to be removed on railings and pieces of cardboard, which were uncomfortable, unsafe, painfully, and inevitably this meant that it took longer for each patient to be removed. This is not the first time that JESIP has failed both in real emergencies and in exercises. With the help of core participants, I have set out a number of recommendations to try and ensure that it works in the future. Those are only some of the large number of recommendations which I hope will be accepted, but more importantly, actioned by those who are in a position to make the necessary changes. One of the other areas covered in the report is the care gap. That is, the inevitable gap between an event such as this bomb explosion happening and the arrival of people trained to give expert medical help. To try and reduce that gap, what we need to ensure is that there are suitable people on site at places such as the arena who are able to give emergency life-saving assistance, which may result in people surviving who otherwise would not if they had to wait for the arrival of medical professionals. This could be included as part of the protect duty, but we will need to see what the government proposes. Can I repeat my encouragement to the government to consider bringing in legislation imposing a protect duty on companies that operate large places of entertainment who cater for large audiences like the arena as soon as possible, rather than trying to include that as part of a comprehensive protect duty. I am not to be understood by that to be discouraging a protect duty for smaller venues, which I support. It is just that I can see no reason why the duty for larger venues should not be completed quickly. As I think has been accepted, police officers, firefighters, and those who are likely to be first on the scene should also have those necessary life-saving skills. Finally, but not least important, members of the public who are unlucky enough to find themselves at the aftermath of a disaster and choose to remain and help should have the opportunity to get training to enable them to do something which may save a life. Members of the public made an enormous contribution on the night of the 22nd of May. But it would have been even greater if they had had the training to deal with the sort of injuries that they were faced with. I have made recommendations on all these topics, although implementation in some cases may already be taking place. We also heard evidence about the different systems used in other countries to try and ensure the best possible chance of saving lives. Some of those countries use different procedures to try and ensure that the best possible medical assistance is got to the injured quickly and they are removed to hospital as soon as possible. It may not be possible to replicate those systems in this country, but we should consider radical alternatives to ensure the best possible outcomes. I have made recommendations designed to ensure that these alternatives are considered and that everything that can reasonably be done to fill the care gap is done. We had a hearing quite a long time ago about the steps that I needed to take in order to monitor my recommendations, as I am determined to do. Having carefully considered those submissions, we have been in discussion with the Home Office to decide on the best way to achieve this. I believe that in principle it is accepted that there is a strong argument for some of the recommendations to be monitored. Agreement has not yet been reached as to the best mechanism for achieving this. I have had a meeting with the Home Secretary to try and bring this matter to a speedy conclusion, and that will be followed up by a further meeting. I believe that I have reached the correct conclusions about what went wrong. I have had the assistance of many very clever and hard-working people, to all of whom I am extremely grateful. I also hope that this inquiry will make a difference, and that things that went wrong on the 22nd of May will never be repeated. This is a hope which is shared by the Home Secretary, and I hope that we can work together to achieve that aim. I am confident that all the rescue services are also determined that this should happen.
Well, a sobering and scathing report there from Sir John Saunders, the chairman of the Manchester Arena inquiry. No questions being taken there from reporters, but let's update you with the main findings of that second part of this report. And his findings is that one of the victims, John Atkinson, who was 28, would probably have survived that attack, the bombing, but for inadequacies in the emergency response. But in addition, Sir John did say highly unlikely that the bombing's youngest victim, 8-year-old Safi Rose Roussos, could have survived her injuries, with only a remote possibility she could have survived with different treatment and care. Clearly very upsetting for all the families involved to hear this evidence. But in particular, Sir John had looked at Mr. Atkinson's case, where a member of the public had used his wife's belt as a tourniquet on his leg as he lay bleeding in that city room for up to 50 minutes. 3 paramedics entered the city room. None were able to attend or assist Mr. Atkinson before he was carried away in a makeshift stretcher and later suffered a heart attack an hour and 60 minutes after that because of the loss of blood from his injuries. Sir John saying there were significant aspects of the emergency response on 22nd of May 2017 went wrong. This should not have happened. Some of what went wrong had serious, and in the case of John Atkinson, fatal consequences for those directly affected by the explosion. He was saying that criticism must not be overshadowing the admiration for the public and those members of the emergency services who had gone in to help. But clearly, he said there were problems with training and experience, and in particular, the failure of the joint service operation, which he said meant things should and could have been better. There should have been more paramedics in the triage area of the city room. Firefighters could have arrived, he said, instead of the heartbreaking evidence where victims were hearing sirens and yet the paramedics were not able to attend them to help. People and the injured being removed, he said, on railings and cardboard. To remind you, 22 people killed in that bombing carried out by Salman Abedi. And clearly, for the people of Manchester there, it has been a long wait to find these details. I think we can now speak to Sophie Reaper, our correspondent, who's been following this story. And Sophie, of course, members of the families had been steeling themselves for these findings. And clearly, Sir John indicating everyone trying to do their best, but the system itself failed.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think we will hear from some of the families of the 22 involved a little bit later on today. Of course, we have only in the last 20 minutes or so heard this second part of the inquiry after the Manchester Arena bomb just over 5 years ago now. The inquiry was into how prepared each of the emergency services were to handle a terrorist attack. And the report considered evidence that was heard by, as you say, the chair, Sir John Saunders. That's been laid before Parliament, and we've just been hearing Sir John Saunders. There was a minute's silence, I believe, before he began began to give his statement. And as you say, he identified some of the key failings in the report. I've just been reading it. He identifies 12 of the key failures, one of which was a lack of communication between all of the emergency responders. There was delays by the Northwest Ambulance Service in getting ambulances and paramedics to the scene. The 12th failure that he identified was a failure of anyone in a senior position in the Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service to take a grip of the situation during the critical period of response. Now, as I say, this is the second part of the report into the inquiry around the failings on the night of the arena bomb. I spoke to two of the survivors yesterday, Amelia and her mum, Lisa. Now, they were telling me that on the night, they really felt there was no response from any of the emergency services, and they feel that now that this second part of the inquiry is out, they'll never forget this thing. It's something that will stay with them forever. Amelia has since been diagnosed with severe PTSD and anorexia, and she says since that moment she's never lived a normal day. But what she did say to me was that although she was 11 when that happened, she feels that hearing the inquiry is something that will maybe help her find a little bit of peace.
Indeed. Sophie, a heartbreaking story, of course. Thank you for updating us there in Manchester. And in terms of what may now come about, just to remind you, Sir John Saunders urging the government now to bring in legislation to impose a protect duty on companies operating large entertainment venues as soon as possible. We'll see what the government's response is to that. Now, let's move back to the other politics of the day with the migrant crisis continuing. We've got the Home Secretary at the moment at Manston looking at conditions there at the processing centre. But we also got the results of the latest GBNews People's poll. And it's revealed that 58% of you think that the government has lost control of our borders. Only 14% thinking the government is in control. While on the particular issue of Albanian migrants, which Mark White has been outlining for us, 61% of you think they should be asked to return to Albania. And in the latest snapshot of politics overall, voting intentions, Labour's lead is down, and that is a fall of 4 points on last week as the Conservative recovery, well, if it is a recovery, continues. But Labour on 47%, Conservatives still down at 21%, Lib Dems on 10%. Let's get more analysis with Olivia Utley from our political staff joining us. And Olivia, clearly the whole issue about how immigration and migrants in particular is really concerning people.
Yeah, it seems to be the number one issue facing Rishi Sunak. And Keir Starmer obviously pulled that out at PMQs. People were expecting him to talk about maybe COP, but instead he focused all of his questions on immigration. He, very interestingly, has totally changed tack from either the Blair or the Cormann administrations and is now sounding very tough on borders. Someone put it as more sun than guardian in his language, which means that it's quite difficult for the government to get any clear water between themselves and Labour, and that's a bit of a problem. It sounds like the government's plan at the moment is to create this bespoke route for Albanian migrants, which basically will involve processing their applications very quickly and deporting them quickly if necessary. That's all very well, but it won't help with the backlog that we've already got. The government's also talking about unwinding this modern slavery legislation, which has become this massive loophole in our immigration system, because anyone who claims to be a victim of modern slavery, the burden of proof is very, very low, and they can be granted political asylum on that basis. So there is movement. It does feel as though Rishi Sunak and the ministers around him are trying to get a grip of it, but it's hard to see how it could happen soon enough for the Conservatives to benefit at the election.
And we've got Suella Braverman at Manston at the moment. We don't know if she'll be talking to reporters. Mark White, our Home Affairs editor, is there to try and get a word. But clearly, there are still problems. So we've got this report that one of the coaches that left Manston suddenly ended up in Victoria, in the middle of London, and literally dumped people on the pavement dressed in flip-flops and no warm clothing. I mean, clearly something is still going wrong with the system.
Yeah, it feels as though basically the system has completely disintegrated. Manston needed to be emptied out because obviously it had become far too full and the conditions there were appalling. But also the only other option, because there are very, very few detention centres in the country, is to put up migrants in hotels. And that is becoming more and more difficult because there are 4 councils across the country that are now suing the government for putting migrants in those hotels. And it feels as though that's a trend that's going to just keep continuing. Obviously, taxpayer isn't too happy about it costing £7 million a day. So Suella was very reluctant to sign off on that. But in being reluctant to sign off on that, she didn't manage to find any sort of alternative solution, which has ended up in this absolutely bizarre and inhumane situation where people are just being dumped in Victoria Station.
Yeah, and those people now, we understand, are in Norfolk. So from Manston to Victoria to Norfolk, a round Britain tour, it seems. Thank you very much for updating us with the results of that GB News poll. Thank you for being with us here on GB Newsday. We're back on Monday at 12, but don't go anywhere. GB News Live coming up with Patrick Christis, and thunder and lightning in the weather. Very, very frightening.
Hi there, Aidan McGivern here with the latest forecast from the Met Office. Further heavy showers to come in many places. Some of these will be thundery, but there'll be clear intervals in between, and increasingly clear skies will move in overnight. But for the time being, plenty of low pressure on the charts. One clearing away to the north, that brought the unsettled weather yesterday. Another one moving into the North Sea, that's clearing the rain from the southeast. But attention turns to the southwest, Wales, southwest England, and then later the English Channel coast. That's where the heavy showers will predominate, and we're going to see these turn thundery and perhaps persist along the coastline from Dorset to Kent, with the risk of 40 millimetres of rain overnight. So that could cause some issues, yellow warning in force. Otherwise, for most of the rest of the UK, we're going to see clearing skies. And for parts of northern England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, where we get some shelter from the breeze, temperatures dipping to -2 or -3 first thing. That would make it the coldest morning since, I'd say, the second week of October. And for many, it's a bright start, but there'll be further showers coming along. Not as lively as they've been at times this week. They're mostly going to affect northern and western Scotland, Northern Ireland, western parts of England and Wales. Otherwise, blue skies for many and temperatures at around average or just below. 13 or 14 in the south, 11 or 12 in the north. Into the evening, further showers come along for the western part of the UK at first, but otherwise clear spells and temperatures falling away ahead of the next weather system that's moving in. So perhaps a touch of frost first thing in the east, but in the west it's turning milder through the night as it turns wetter and increasingly windy. And that sets the scene for Saturday morning. A bright but chilly start in the east, a wet and breezy start in the west. Rain spreads east through the day and then it clears to showers. And so by Sunday, well, it's another changeable day with some rain lingering in the southeast, blustery showers elsewhere. Monday brings further spells of wind and rain.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's, with you all the way through until 6 o'clock. And today's show is all about borders, terror and the money in your pocket. Coming up, I don't know about you, but I'm still absolutely fizzing from that Manchester Arena inquiry report. Devastating verdicts there. Within the last half hour, that inquiry has concluded that one of the victims would have survived, but for inadequacies in the emergency response. Speaking a few moments ago, the inquiry chairman, Sir John Saunders, urged the government to bring in legislation imposing a protect duty on companies which operate large entertainment venues as soon as possible. We're going to hear live from the victims' families in the next few minutes, as well as the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, and a response from the emergency services too. So lots to bring you live before 6 o'clock. I am also asking the question, why on earth was that depraved terrorist even allowed back into Britain? There's also another massive question. Why on earth was Salman Abedi, of course, allowed to wreak havoc in that arena? People say that far-right terrorist is the biggest threat, but is it really when you consider what's happened there? We're going to be talking about all of that. Also this hour, the Home Secretary is in Dover today, touring immigration centres in Kent as she battles to get a grip on the chaos in the asylum system. Suella Braverman has faced international criticism over her claim the UK faced an invasion of migrants. Frankly, I don't really care what the leader of Albania thinks. His country is milking the UK economy dry. We can't send them money to make their country better because the whole place is so corrupt it'll never see the light of day. We'll ask what sort of reception she's received on the South Coast, which, yes, she did say was being invaded. And as a GB News People's poll revealed, 58% of the country think the British government has lost control of its borders. Do you? That's my big question today. Do you think we have lost control of our borders? Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But before that, it's your latest headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 3. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The emergency response to the Manchester Arena bombing was far below the standard it should have been, an inquiry has found. The second of 3 official reports found the injuries of one of the attack's victims, John Atkinson, were survivable had he received the necessary care. 22 people were killed and hundreds injured in a suicide attack at an Ariana Grande concert in 2017. The report's chairman, Sir John Saunders, has urged the government to bring in legislation imposing a protect duty on companies operating large entertainment venues as soon as possible.
The criticisms that I have made are principally directed at organisations, and there were significant failings by a number of organisations in preparation and training for an emergency such as this. Had firefighters got to the city room as soon as they could have done, they would have removed the injured using proper equipment, which would have been safe and quick. Instead, the injured had to be removed on railings and pieces of cardboard, which were uncomfortable, unsafe, painfully, and inevitably this meant that it took longer for each patient to be removed.
The Bank of England has warned the UK is facing a tough road ahead as it raised the interest rate to tackle soaring inflation. The base rate is going up by 0.75 percentage points to 3%, which is the single biggest rise in more than 3 decades. The Bank of England says the country is on course for its longest recession since the 1920s, with its Governor Andrew Bailey saying they had to act.
People should not have to worry about inflation as they go about their daily business. That's why we've been raising interest rates and did so again today. Low and stable inflation is the bedrock of a stable economy, a predictable economy in which people can go about their lives and plan for their futures with confidence. An economy in which hard-earned money keeps its value. If we do not act forcefully now, it will be worse later on. And as the forecast we are publishing today shows, it is a tough road ahead.
Well, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, says the government will do what it can to restore stability and tackle the UK's battered public finances.
Today's news is going to be very tough for families with mortgages up and down the country, for businesses with loans. But there is a global economic crisis. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, say a third of the world's economy is now in recession. And the best thing the government can do if we want to bring down these rises in interest rates is to show that we're bringing down our debt. Families up and down the country have to balance their accounts at home, and we must do the same as a government.
Meanwhile, Labour has accused Conservatives of losing control of the economy. The Shadow Chancellor says her party's plan for growth is what the country needs.
We could and should be doing so much better than this. We're a fantastic country with great skills, a great industry, and yet we are not firing on all cylinders. The government have had 12 years to tackle these challenges, and yet here we are with low growth and a cost of living crisis. Labour's plan for economic stability, for tackling the cost of living crisis, and a real plan for economic growth is what we need right now.
Home Secretary Suella Braverman is visiting the Manston Immigration Centre this afternoon as she comes under increasing pressure over her handling of the migrant crisis. The government faces potential legal action over conditions at the Manston facility in Kent. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has backed Ms Braverman's handling of the issue, saying she's taken significant steps in addressing overcrowding there. Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen faces being suspended from the House of Commons for a series of breaches of the rules. The Standards Committee has recommended the MP for North West Leicestershire be suspended for 5 sitting days over what it calls a cavalier attitude to the rules. Mr Bridgen says he's extremely disappointed but accepts the findings. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan has been shot in the leg after a gunman opened fire on his convoy. The assassination attempt happened as he was leading a protest march on the capital Islamabad to demand a snap election. Mr Khan has been taken to hospital. His injuries aren't thought to be life-threatening. The Kremlin has protested to the UK ambassador to Russia after claiming British specialists were involved in a Ukrainian drone strike on its Black Sea fleet in Crimea. Crowds chanted and held placards calling Britain a terrorist state as the British ambassador was summoned to the Russian Foreign Ministry headquarters. Moscow says Saturday's attack was carried out under the guidance and leadership of the Royal Navy, a claim the UK denies. The Russian Foreign Ministry says the UK's actions could result in unpredictable and dangerous consequences. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Patrick.
This is GB